Okay, it's blinding. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Hi. Is everyone okay? I know you guys had a time last night, but is everyone fine? Okay. So, no problem. So let me just start off with some housekeeping. I know everyone has issues with the Wi-Fi, so you actually need to create an account. After creating an account, you'll get 10 minutes, but you'll need to verify the account. So please look for Meraki on your emails and verify it, and you'll be set for life. So you won't need to recreate any account or Kuku. And then 2, I have someone's phone here. I don't know who it belongs to. Okay. No problem. So let me officially start the day and welcome you guys to day 2, which is themed under AI, emerging tech, and the future of journalism in Africa. So I think this is the main core of our conference, which is on tech and journalism in the global south. But before I start, I would just like to get some insights from yesterday. So maybe 2 minutes from someone who's volunteering. What stood out for you yesterday? What was the greatest session? Maybe moderators, let's put people on the spot. Okay.
Excluding the wine and the food.
Yeah. Okay, excluding the wine and the food. So do we have any volunteer? Seems like we don't, so let me move on. So today, keynote speaker is not able to join us because he has a standing convening in Geneva, but we are pleased that we'll have him online. not necessarily online, but we have a recording for him. So let me just give you a brief bio, his brief bio and brief introduction to him. So Prof. Vukosi Marivate is the Chair of Data Science and Professor of Computer Science at the University of Pretoria, where he leads the Data Science for Social Impact Group. His research focuses on machine learning, artificial intelligence, and natural processing languages, particularly for African and other lower resources languages. He co-founded the LAPA AI, the Masakane Research Foundation, and the Deep Learning Endeavor. His work spans social challenges in science, energy, public safety, and utilities, aiming to create AI for Africans by Africans. So today we are pleased to have Prof. Vukosi Marivate join us, giving his keynote on African languages, AI, and the impact on African journalism.
Good day, everybody. I am Vukosi Marivate. I am the Chair of Data Science at the University of Pretoria in South Africa and Director of the African Institute for Data Science and AI. I take myself as a community organizer for AI across the African continent, with most of my work being in natural language processing. I co-founded the Deep Learning Endeavor, Masakane, which are movements that advocate for AI across the continent, and I'm also a co-founder of the LAPA AI, a socially conscious startup on AI. Now, just to set the scene, let's talk about machine learning. Machine learning is a subset of AI where we learn patterns from data. So a simple example, let's say we're given two dots, one on the left, one on the right, and what you're trying to do is say, in the future, when there's a dot, what color will it be? The simplest thing is to learn a simple straight line that's equidistant between two dots, and you just say, hey, whatever's on the left of that line in the future, I'll say it's red, what's on the right is blue. This is a simplification. Your data could be more complicated, so now you get more data, you then have to learn a more complicated decision boundary. Why has this become such a big thing? In the past, as a programmer, you'd have to write very specific instructions to the machine to then say, hey, if you get in data, this is what then you interpret it. But with machine learning, you provide as much data as possible, and the machine learns the patterns. In natural language processing, there's been a huge history of 70 years, right? Going into machine translation, speech systems, text-to-speech, and recently the large language models. But these really center English. Why is this a problem? If you look at GPT 3.5 in February 2023, you could ask it, please count from 1 to 10 in isiZulu, and it would actually respond and say, ku1, ku2, ku3, which is completely wrong. You say, translate from isiZulu to English, and kuyabiza ukugibela ibhanoyi, which in Zulu means it's expensive to go on an airplane. And that's how GPT responded. He insults him by calling him a cow, and many, many more problems. Why? A recent benchmark called UltraBench that was created by a team of researchers, African researchers, looks at different tasks like text classification, sentiment analysis, machine translation, and other natural language processing tasks and see how well do these LLMs actually do. And this is the finding. Here, what you look at is performance. What you want is somewhere close to 100. These are the different open models. Here's a few closed models that are there. And you will see that on average, the open models under 50, and then the big closed models, some of them get to 60. If then you fine-tune, so specifically fine-tune them for specific tasks in African languages, you see that now you get performances that are over 70. So if you're actually trained on African tasks and languages. So to train these models, you need a lot of pre-training data. If you're South African like me, one of the ways we can look at this is what is the representation of African languages in something like Wikipedia, because this data gets pre-trained. So English Wikipedia is almost 7 million articles. If you think about Africa, Egyptian Arabic is about 1.6 million. Swahili, spoken by millions and millions of people, only has 80,000 articles. There's Yoruba, 33,000, isiZulu, 10,000 or 11,000, Southern Sukse, 900. So there is not that data inside. But to train these really, really big models, we need more than Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is not enough. So what gets used is web crawling data. So web crawlers, what they do is they go around the internet. Initially, they were used for search engines, but then now there's services that also download or archive the internet for different uses, including research or journalistic research. More lately, this same data is used to actually train AI models. So I want to talk about Common Crawl. So Common Crawl is a big web crawl data that was created to archive the internet. It's a free open repository of web crawl data. So it has about 250 billion pages spanning about 17 years, and it's now been free and open since 2007. Now, the problem with Common Crawl is that what it does is that it provides this information, but it's mostly in English. Now, what I mean by mostly, like more than 95% of its data is in English. So what happens with Common Crawl is that they take their crawls, they then try to identify if the content is in English, and if it's not, they tend to remove it. The reason that they remove it is that they do not have safety filters. So safety filters are, you might have child sexual abuse content that is sitting somewhere on the internet. And you then want to build a filter that then actually removes that content and you don't save it in your archive. The problem is, how do you identify that same content, but in the other thousands of languages of the world? You might not have that capability. So it might be safer just to say, I will only keep English and remove everything else because I can only safely filter whatever is in English. But this has consequence because the basic training data to train a large language model tends to be, for these very big models, to come from something like Common Crawl. And as such, it doesn't represent all of us, right? It only represents kind of a very specific view. And it's also a opinionated crawl, meaning it only goes and checks specific types of websites. Not everything is actually archived in those spaces. So what does this mean for us at this gathering, right? African languages representation matters. We have 2,000 languages on the African continent, but most are actually invisible to AR LLMs. Journalism also relies on access to timely, accurate, and relatable information. And as such, if you're excluding African languages in these, you exclude these audiences. To build towards equitable AI means also ensuring African citizens can consume and contribute to media in their mother tongues. So we want to preserve the dignity, allow people to participate, and then also have them have agency in this public sphere. There are risks, though. The benchmarks, as I showed you, show poor performance on global LLMs on African language tasks. This means there might be misinformation because when that model has to then respond to something, it's using the statistical information from the data that it has. So there's going to be mistranslation, loss of nuance, and also erasure of people. This training data is very scarce. There's poor ways to represent these languages, and as such, even the evaluation benchmarks, what I showed you at Upper Bench, is very rare. There's dependencies then also on building these LLMs really being from the West, right? And as such, it might be that on those teams, there's not people who actually understand the challenge that other people actually face in using these systems. There are community-led approaches to try and resolve this. One is Masakane on the African continent and other grassroots natural language processing initiatives that work to build with communities. Local journalists, linguists, and technologists are shaping new data and evaluations as well. We also need to think about consent, ownership, and open science. We want to be open in that people can then study and better build for the languages, but at the same time, let's think about consent on how content is used by different organizations. As such, one way that people are doing is creating participatory benchmarks. They're doing center tasks that center African languages that you can find online. Other things, for example, that I've been part of is building a way for people to get access to terminology lists that have been created for many languages in an easy way. This gives you access to indigenous knowledge. It allows you to translate and then hopefully reach your audience in a much better way. Why is this useful? You can then see systems that can better respond when you actually give them requests about specific things. This gets us to build inclusive AI that empower us and yourselves in doing your work. So let's make sure journalism gets to a point where it speaks in all of Africa's languages, powered by locally built AI. Let's also invest in language inclusion as a democratic and developmental imperative, right? So meaning champion the writing in local language, asking the newsrooms to also go and make sure that some of their content is localized. We wanted to help with this. We built Marito, which is this data set for South African languages, where you get access to terminology lists. Once you have access to these terminology lists, one of the things that you can do, for example, is use with an LLM to now be able to help translate contextually. For example, one of the things we did was test if you can then take content about elections, ask the LLM to translate from English to Chivenda, one of our languages, and then use a terminology list to help it choose which actually words that are hard to find inside an LLM to actually replace and put inside. And this showed like very good promise. Masakani, as I talked about earlier, works with a network of over 3,000 researchers who work on natural language processing, engage with each other, and really build the next generation of natural language processing tools. Not everything is about LLMs. It might be a good translation tool, a speech tool. All of these are worth studying and making better. At Delapa, we work on building resource-efficient AI from Africa to the world. And we have multilingual speech systems that are available. We have a small language model called Nguba LM. And we've also thought about how do we license data better for communities to actually have sustainable ways that they can grow their resources that are used in AI. Nguba LM was the first African LLM that was built, and we're still trying to make it even smaller in these areas. So with this, I hope you've learned a bit from my talk, and that also you go out there and interact with all these communities and try to then find ways that you can use it in your work. Thank you for all our collaborators, as well as our funders as we do this work. Thank you, and please have a good meeting.
So we'll move smoothly to the second session, which is we are going to get the provocation from Prof. Alison Gilwood, if she can make her to the stage. And then thereafter, we'll have Zoe Titus moderating the session. So if everyone is mic'd up, we'll move smoothly. Prof. Alison, this is cool.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you very much to Michael and the team, and of course to the team that have brought this together. Very excited to speak after Vukosi, who we've collaborating a lot on, particularly around the G20 and the AI task force, that we're trying to put a different angle on some of the global governance issues that are being tackled within World Summit on Information Society, the Global Digital Compact, and things that have obviously raised these important issues in the global context of inequality, but often don't actually materialize in the outcomes that they're suggesting, in ways that would support what we're trying to do. I'm going to really be looking at AI policy more broadly than just the media dimensions of that, and I'm doing this very intentionally, because I think a lot of what we land up doing when we're trying to look at, freedom of expression issues or revenue, erosion issues, or these kinds of things, is we look at a snippet, or now data to access and information. We're looking at a snippet of this, completely now general purpose technology. This entire technology that has entirely affected our whole digital economy and our economy and society, and no longer is just in a silo at all. So I really think that this it requires us looking at AI across economy and society. It also requires us looking at AI in a far more nuanced way than we have. So we tend to speak about AI as if it's one thing, and I think it's really important as we look towards the regulation of AI, which I'll come back to in the beginning because I think we're not there at all, is that we begin to look at the different kinds of AI and the different kinds of regulation that are required there. I also think it's really important to look at the issues that we tend to look at this at a kind of national policy level, but in fact, a lot of the conditions under which we can operate are really globally determined. And a lot of the solutions that we've got, despite national successes that we were told about from the information regulator and the competition commission, which of course we applaud, and I think can be brought into collaborative efforts, is that many of these challenges can only be addressed at a global governance level, and so it's really important that we are more active, as African voices in forums of global governance, in multilateral forums, which obviously we support, but are not necessarily producing the best outcomes for Africa at the moment. And I think when we see some of this around the processes and languages within the G20 process, which in many ways the agenda and the outcomes are in fact far more conservative than many of the African frameworks that we've got and the African agendas that we've got around reform, or transformation, I should say. So I think it's also, important that we get this kind of broader understanding of the sort of political economy of AI as it's developing, and of course, of the different donor, multilateral, and development agendas and priorities that are being driven in, across the continent. And also that we look at, what our resistance and our adoption and promotion of certain of these issues are. And I think in many ways it's important that we also understand this as part of a broader trajectory. We often come into this and we've been speaking about other things, and now we're going to speak about AI governance. And I think it's really important to understand that this is an evolving technology that is building on previous inequalities and power asymmetries that have preceded it, and allow the kind of asymmetrical power relations that we see now. And that in fact, in many ways, it's not very different. Those asymmetries of power that we're seeing are not very different from those that characterized and indeed defined our New World Information Order debates 30 years ago at the start of, pre-WSIS, but really felt that the World Summit and Information Society was going to transform that because of the transformative nature of the internet. And the multi-stakeholder processes that have really developed enormously over the last 20 years. And yet, the outcomes now of those processes are, even a greater concentration than ever before in terms of the ownership of these, general purpose technologies, these primary means of production. And I think it's also important to understand this in terms of the growing evolution of governance and regulation, and to speak about the impacts of a regulatory environment coming together with a completely deregulated environment, or unregulated in the case of data. So deregulated in terms of telecoms, with the private positioning of public goods, but now increasingly with the completely unregulated aspects of AI. And I think just to remind us of that, I don't know if any of you are tech policy press followers, but the very interesting most recent podcast by Peter Thornburg and Justice Utermark, by Tech Policy Press interviewing them on a book called Seeing Like a Platform, an inquiry into the conditions of digital modernity and epistemology, technology, politics in digital modernity. And I think it's really the kind of continuities that we're seeing. There's probably not a lot new in that book, but it's a really useful reminder of how we get to the position that we're in now. And the outcomes, as I said, of these provisioning of public goods by private entities, and our efforts now, I hope, to reclaim some of these digital public goods and global digital public goods, of which data is one. It's not necessarily one, but I think is a critical input into these systems. So, I think just to say that there's a lot of the current sort of dominant paradigm is focusing on a kind of light touch. I think there have been examples, and I'll come back to them now again, of different regional responses to this. But broadly, there's been the rise of AI has really been in the context of the extraordinary innovation, the promise that this technology is able to solve some of the greatest planetary challenges of our time, including climate change. And in fact, the call for, that led to the Global Digital Compact by the Secretary General of the UN was precisely around the post-COVID, longer before, but specifically in the context of post-COVID, is that the degree to which we would effectively regulate climate change and digitalization, and obviously AI coming from the rapid evolution of digitalization in the post-COVID period, would really determine which way we went in terms of digital inequality going forward. I mean, which way we'd go in terms of equality going forward. And so I think, while there are extraordinary examples of the potential of AI, I think the overwhelming evidence is that systemically, there's more evidence of harm that is being caused at the moment from AI. And that's not only the harms that we've kind of traditionally speak about in terms of breaches of privacy and those kind of things. I think we're seeing more and more as we move into different kinds of generative AI, agentic AI, this anthropomorphic chatbots as we got now, where people are actually youth, children, people who are isolated are actually beginning to treat these as human people and just facing severe harms and even suicide and these kinds of things. So this kind of technology with these kinds of implications, would ordinarily face extensive regulation before it went to market. And so I think although we've got a system within our data protection systems and privacy focused, quite individualized focused regulation, we've got some protections on some of those things. But these tend not to look at the systematic exclusion of people. And so as it was with basic mobile internet access, today this critical policy problem still remains the issue of the digital equality paradox, that as we overlay these more and more advanced technologies over existing inequalities, that we are actually exacerbating these inequalities. And so that the self-regulation, non-regulation models, the dominant paradigm within global governance, multilateral systems of responsible and ethical AI, can't actually address the fact that we've got people digitally excluded from those AI tools that Vukosi was speaking about, systematically excluded. And it's not just 1/3, which would be already a problem. It's more like half the population, half the world's population that are not even connected properly, and then of course meaningfully connected, able to participate in this is much greater. So these ethics by design mechanisms are really around placing the onus on producers of AI to self-regulate or to design stuff in such a way that you don't have to do any regulation because it happens by design. But we actually know from these massive audits done by people like Abebe Behani that are looking at systematic invisibility of people, underrepresentation, discrimination of people simply by not coming up in these data sets. So you can't do an ethics by design fix on the biases in these algorithms because the data is simply not there for Africa. Africa is simply largely, and people of African descent in many parts of the world are simply invisible from these technologies. So I think what we've tried to do within the African context and certainly within the G20 is to challenge and extend some of these things, because obviously these dominant paradigms, because across the continent and many of our countries, but across the continent, there is not regular funding to do the kind of policy development that we need to do. So at the African continental level, at the AU level, all the recent data policy framework, the digital transformation strategy, the AI continental strategy, these are all funded by different donor agendas. And those donor agendas are very clear. And some of them are well-meaning, some of them are appropriate for mature economies, but very few of them are actually looking at the issues of redress that we need in order to affect these imbalances, and in order to produce to get the very kind of positive outcomes that you can get from AI. So very quickly, I just think that some of the bigger challenges here, and I've lost track of time because you're going to have to give me a wave, just to say that so the real issue here around the sort of dominant paradigm is that we've got a lot of focus on individualized notions of privacy and the harms of that, not a lot of focus on some of the collective and systemic harms that are associated with that. But what we've also got in looking at some of the work that looks, data justice work that's been done in the European context and across the global south, which begins to look at the uneven impact of these harms on communities where people are using GDPR, informed consent, people don't have legal things, they don't have the English language or whatever that's being used to sign off on many of these these data instruments. But also very importantly, and this is where we really are having trouble within the context of G20 and within the Global Digital Compact and many of the multilateral organizations, is really to deal with the issues not only of social justice, but of economic justice, of looking at the uneven distribution of opportunities that go with this. So it's not just about being passive, users or harmed users, which is terrible enough, but it's actually that we're unable to mobilize and use these opportunities. And it's often because we're stifled by certain things, like I mentioned yesterday, by our own digital protocols that aligned with the World Telecommunications Organization that prevent us from doing what we plan to do in the data policy framework and provide preferential access to African data, to African researchers through African open government portals and those kinds of things. So this, I think what we're really trying to do with the focus on the G20 AI task force is firstly look at this holistically. So we're not just looking very narrowly at a data breach or those kinds of harms. We're actually looking at the whole value chain. We're looking at the whole ecosystem. We're looking at the extractive, the exploitative labor that goes with mineral extraction for AI, through to the labor exploitation that goes through to labeling, that goes on with data extraction in AI, to looking at the very negative impacts of these massive, big energy hungry warehouses that are, being built, and we're all scrambling to have our own on the continent. Meanwhile, I don't know, in some place in the States, Ontario, they're actually refusing to have it, not on our doorstep, our backyard, and you can go elsewhere. So I think that I just wanted to say very importantly in terms of that, and I'll wrap up in 1 minute, is just that, so we've got these frameworks, they're quite dependent on who's promoting them and who's pushing them. They're very often not very organically developed. It's done very often through this member process, where I think we're trying to open up those systems a lot more. It's quite dependent on who actually does that work. And I think what is, we've got now the AI continental strategy, and it's, very aligned to multilateral and UN systems in many ways. It's still is a responsibility and ethics framework. It's it really doesn't deal with the second and third generation rights that we're very concerned with dealing about, not only the first generation rights. And it sadly really doesn't build a lot on the data policy, which self-disclosure, I was supporting the AU on it, but that really brought out the issues of digital inequality and of injustice, and the need for redress, the need to redefine the potential outputs of data-driven technologies through the creation of public value. And so in my last thing, I'm going to flag it, and I'll talk to people afterwards, but just to say that the very interesting project that we are hoping, and I'm working with Guy Berger here as well, with Vukosi Maravati, is to sort of innovate around public value and to innovate around the use of AI to draw on the local, incredibly rich language databases that we have within the SABC, and the getting these available for the kind of work that public interest work that is being done, but to create a new notion of data value, of public value, that's not just in its silos and different things. So the public broadcaster could become, the major source of local language, a database, a data input for local language modeling. It could be supported by the Innovation Fund. You could create a really virtuous cycle of local AI, public interest AI. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alison. So I think from our understanding, we tend to forget that the rights that we have online somewhat are the rights that we should have offline, but we're seemingly replicating the inequalities. So thank you so much for stressing that out. So it's very important for us to ensure that there's digital inclusion. So please help me welcome Zoe Titus with her fellow panelist, Lisa Rombe from Research ICT Africa, Prof. Thompson Chengeta, Liverpool John Moores University, as well as Churchill Otiene from the Eastern Africa Editors Forum. This panel will be exploring the efficacy of the African legal instruments that have been developed, as well as their implication on press freedom. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, that doesn't sound very good. It really sounds bad. And we're going to be talking policy, people, so give me something better. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We had a wonderful dinner last night, didn't we? Oh, I'm definitely going back there. I'm very excited about the people who spoke earlier. In the keynote address and then the provocation by Alison, because these are some things that are very close to my heart, especially, Alison's framing around social justice, because we can't speak about, parity of participation without those elements of representation, of recognition and redistribution. And we need to have a much more holistic approach to how we're tackling AI. So I think yesterday is not really, we didn't spend much time on this topic yesterday, so we will be setting the scene today on this very important aspect around talking about AI. Artificial intelligence is not just reshaping technology, it's reshaping governance, power, and who gets to participate in public life. Our panel today is not just about talking about African strategies on AI, governance, and digital inclusion. It's about asking whose strategies, whose values, and whose futures are being encoded in these systems. In a keynote address yesterday, Nanjira Sambuli reminded us that AI doesn't have an ethics problem. It is an epistemology problem, one that challenges us to think critically about how knowledge is produced, who controls it, and what narratives shape policy. So in this session, my very knowledgeable panelists are going to help us to ask those questions and hopefully provide answers to these questions. Are our governance frameworks and inclusion policies responding to the real challenges faced by African media systems? And are they protecting press freedom, access to information and digital rights? Or are we reacting to models that were never built to include us from the start? So, good morning, everyone. Liz, I'd love to start with you. From your work engaging with continental and national frameworks, do you believe that Africa's current digital and AI strategies are strong enough to protect press freedom, media independence, and meaningful access to information?
I would say yes and no. We are strong on paper, but we don't make the commitments when it comes to implementation of policy. And I would say that we have several policies on AI, continental policies, national policies. We have the white paper. We have the, someone's laughing about the white paper. We have the continental AI strategy by the AU. And we have other policies that were developed before that. We have the AU data policy framework. We also have rights that also connect to the AI policies. Now, you asked whether they have press protections, media protections. So they don't explicitly talk about media and press protections. The kind of protections that we see these policies have is data protection policies, data governance framework, how data flows, things like that, freedom of expression, generation of this data again, and things to do with IP laws. The reason why I would say that these frameworks are not strong is the institutions implementing them are also not strong. Remember, we also have a lot of interference, executive interference with the institutions, interference. They don't have much capacity and independence to do their work. We also have the data protection and the data protection commissions. I don't want to criticize the one in Kenya because it's done a lot of work, but there's still gaps, especially when it comes to where data protection and political topics are concerned. So what you're seeing on the ground, we see press freedom restricted. So first of all, these frameworks talk about access to data, because if we don't get we don't get data governance right, then of course you're not going to get AI policies or AI governance right. But our data governance frameworks, or how we govern data, is not really democratic. And we see elements about surveillance, where people who are active or critical of the government, they are being trailed on, arrested, and intimidated. Sometimes even because of political satire, use of AI on political satire, and those kinds of things. Right now, you can't go report on Congo. Also, one, because it's unsafe. Two, you also don't have media freedom. You're talking about AI life cycle, yet we can't even report from the mineral source of it in the first place. But also, one of my last is also protection of IP. If you actually go and report on Congo, even if a journalist or a media house, we've come up with these pages of subscription so that people can access and reward the journalists. You only need one bot scroller, and then your content makes it to the large LLMs. So that's really discouraging that type of investigative journalism. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thompson, you have worked to a large extent on designing these policies, looking at it from legal, human rights based perspectives. But based on your work, especially with the African Union, the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, and the UN as well, do you think that Africa's legal and policy frameworks, particularly on AI, are adequately equipped to safeguard, the right to access to information, the right to press freedom, and information in general in the digital era?
Thank you very much for that question, our moderator, and a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by saying I will try to respond to that question in 4 ways. I'll try to have like 4 points. Reason why I'm timing myself that, so that briefly I can be able to articulate that. Otherwise, as a villager, as I said, sometimes I talk and talk until cows come back home. Now, the first thing which I should mention as an international lawyer is to say whatever I'm saying now is not, I'm not speaking on behalf of the African Commission, I'm not speaking on behalf of the UN or any other organization that I'm affiliated with. It's my personal views that I'm articulating, although they are reflected in some of the reports that you saw mentioned. So the first thing which I would want to say when we're talking about the question of adequacy of existing frameworks is to say, what frameworks are we talking about when we're talking about legal governance? Because legal governance is broad. I think even from yesterday, you had from perspective of competition law, many other aspects which are maybe to do with the question of business. From my perspective, I would want to underlie this as the perhaps fundamental point, that when we're talking about governance, especially of AI technologies and how they relate so to say even to freedom of expression and freedom of media, is human rights-based governance. And I'll explain why I emphasize that in these 4 points that I make. Number one, if we're looking from that human rights-based governance of AI technologies in this area of press freedom, do we have something to start with? I would say the answer is yes. In terms of human rights law, treaties, provisions within African countries and at the continental level. Why I want to emphasize the importance of these regimes that are existing already is that although AI is a new era, a new issue that we're dealing with, I've been told, this is my grandmother from the village, she usually says, if a cockroach wants to rule the chicken, it must start first by valuing its own wings to say it can be able to do it. So we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. That charter, if you compare it to many other human rights treaties across the globe, it is one of the best, I would want to say that. Some of the issues that we face, for example, in terms of inequality, in terms of exploitation that comes with this technology, the African Charter already have rights that are specifically addressing that. And I would want to say we need to focus on that. When we talk, for example, the freedom of simply saying we should not be exploited, and we were talking about the question of data, most of the technologies that are being developed, they're developed on data. That's the lifeblood of AI. Who is really benefiting from this particular development of these technologies? I don't think we are all having this benefit. So first of all, yes, I would say there is a foundation that is already there. The second question when we're talking about adequacy as a second point is to say, although we have this African Charter, by the way, before I go to this second point, let me say this. Sometimes it's our fault as lawyers. We always think we're the most clever ones, like no one else can understand. No, the African Charter is written in plain language, really accessible. You go there and read the provisions of what it says. Most of the issues that we have, actually, answers are provided therein. So I would say, no, it's not a lawyer thing. Anyone who go online, it is there. It has got the answers. Of course, it is our fault sometimes. Say like it's the even though I think we're the dumbest. The second point, which I was trying to say, is respect and implementation. To say, even though we may have these laws or these provisions on paper, it's a question of implementation. How are they being implemented? And our major issue right now is that powers that may be, big tech, I'm sorry to bring the issue of big tech, they have so much interest in terms of what they can deploy on the African continent, and the powers which may be on the African continent regulating that sometimes either lack of political willingness or actually some deals being made, and I think that those are things that we need to iron out there. The third point is that, and I think this is one of my favorite points, and I'm coming to the conclusion here, is that when we're interpreting the question of adequacy, do we have adequate frameworks? For me, I'm saying, can we interpret the question of adequacy in terms of real impact on real human beings? When we're saying press freedom, for example, we're not claiming to say we want press freedom, we want protection, we leave the important bit of the sentence, which is, it is for the purposes of protecting real human beings on the ground. And by real human beings, I don't only mean people in this room, whom I will say most of us maybe were elites. I'm talking about everybody. Peoples in the villages. And here I'll end with this story from my grandmother. When we were doing the African Commission research on study on AI and its implications on human rights, I went to Chivi, which is my village in Zimbabwe, in Masvingo. And I'm really explaining to my grandmother, I like talking, explaining to her to say, well, the reason why I came is we're doing also this, whatever AI and stuff, I'm explaining to her, and what it would mean for rights. And she intently looking me dead in the eye, listening to what I was saying. After I had explained to her, her question to me was, so did you say that you're going to buy me the maize seeds which I want for this coming from? Because I was not linking whatever I was saying to the things that matter to everybody. Yeah. So whatever we do when we're talking about this press freedom, we're not saying what are the implications, it shouldn't be about, of course, we do this sometimes we gather here because it's our professions. That's what we do. We get paid to do that. But can we link it to actual impact on the ground of people who are affected day to day? That would be my point, and I won't go to the fourth point because I've already taken too much time, so I'll leave it
and
back
I'm
to you.
very lenient.
Thank you.
Churchill, coming to you, are we seeing, and now we're bringing this to journalism, are we seeing continental I mean, no, from the perspective of leading editorial institutions, how are newsrooms across the continent experiencing the impacts of AI and on issues like, let's say, content production, business models, or editorial independence for that matter? Are current governance discussions addressing governance discussions within newsrooms, within national country sectors, at a regional and continental level? Are these issues being discussed, and what is the impact on journalism?
Thank you, Zoe, and good morning, everyone. The short answer to that is yes and no. Yeah, mostly because at a fairly broad level, we find that when we engage in different territories in Africa, the AI conversations tends to be one driven mostly by the ICT sector, ICT authorities, ICT ministries. The media, for the most part, is silent when you look at the continental map. So you find these frameworks and policies in the cloud mostly. But when you go on ground, it doesn't manifest as strongly and as importantly. And we could look at these at a variety of levels, because using a media lens, content is a critical piece, especially when it comes to us journalists. When I talk to editors across Africa, two groups seem to begin to emerge. We have editors from fairly well-organized institutional setups, and you find that there's a lot more deliberate effort to try and deploy AI in their content work. Yeah? But we also have editors from smaller entities. Prof in his keynote this morning spoke about the African languages. In most of Africa, the medium that goes for the farthest still is radio, still is audio, and mostly audio in vernacular. Yeah. If you are to lay an AI lens on that, they seem not to exist in this conversation as we are today. And those are important exclusionary matters that I think we need to find ways to bring to the surface. From a money perspective, business models, it goes to the core of whether journalism can continue to happen or not, especially so in Africa, where in many of our populations, there is power dynamics that sometimes de-emphasize the voice of the citizen, or even delegitimize questioning of authority. But we find that a lot of content that journalism brings to the surface currently is being exploited by big tech without paying for it, and even without acknowledging it. And in many times, and many more often than not, sometimes even the creators of that content are not aware that their content is being exploited in this manner. So it becomes critical that we begin to find ways in which these issues are not just agenda items for us in the profession, but we need to probably find ways to connect the public interest aspect of journalism so that our citizens become a lot more aware that journalism exists to their benefit, not for journalists. Today, in many spaces, mostly because of the reality that authorities, governments, politicians today can speak straight to their audiences, not all citizens see the clear value that journalism brings to the table. And I think part of that job is ours, to educate and create awareness on the role, the increasing role that journalism must play in that aspect. But going with it, also, the need to help citizens and the public recognize the shifting landscape that we need to operate in, the place of data in all that mix, and therefore the place of AI in defining their lives moving forward. Thank you.
But just, I want to follow up on that. So, I mean, how do we ensure that that public interest journalism itself, as we understand it, isn't sidelined in AI strategies, in AI strategy development, and that it, because this is where we come from, and this is our policy activism agenda, that it remains at the core of democratic governance, democratic institutions, and the kind of world that we're trying to build.
I think the first way is a posture issue for me. Traditionally, journalism and journalists have looked at ourselves as different from the rest of society. And therefore, it's rare that we invite other stakeholders into our conversations, into our issues. The first manifestation of that is that the challenges that we're currently having to confront, we are very, very clear what those challenges are. Is the public as clear as ourselves of those challenges? When you look at the spaces that we control, the content that we push out every single day, how much of that speaks to AI, how much of that speaks to the place of journalism? So finding ways, clever ways to carry the citizens with us as we confront this, I think, is the first critical thing we must do. The second one is a question of organizing. It's often said that power is never given, it's taken. All this conversation is about power dynamics. Those who have the capabilities, those who have the awareness, the knowledge, are happy to run ahead and claim and extract a lot more. As we move into that space, we have to find ways to organize, ways to share information, and ways to share action. When it goes to frameworks that Liz so eloquently spoke about, we must find ways to inject media lenses and journalism lenses into those frameworks, be they frameworks sitting at the continental level at the AU or national levels with our ministries and our governments. Thank you.
I'm going to throw it a little broader because I know we have to move along. I'm going to pose this one to you, Thompson, but Liz, please feel free to add your view. We've discussed policy frameworks, and thank you for giving us the grounding on that. Policy frameworks and legal rights. But what does real agency look like for African actors in shaping our digital futures? Are we mostly reacting to external agendas? Please.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's really an important one, especially when you talk about the question of agency. And for me, when I say agents, I again interpret it broadly to include everybody. By everybody, every people from all walks of life, not only people who can have access to the turbo here. But commenting on the question to say, are we reacting to external agendas? For me, I think largely yes. And I'll give you an example. Most African nations have been adopting, for example, AI national strategies and policies. The wording which you find, the terminologies that you find in those national strategies do not necessarily speak to our issues. And some of them are even inconsistent with human rights standards in the African Charter. I'll give an example. I don't need to pick up a nation, but I'll give an example. If you go on the South African AI strategy, page number 11, you find we're talking about what they say. We recognize that there is bias in AI systems, which is an issue of inequality on the African continent. But what is the solution they are proposing? Bias mitigation. What does that mean? Where exactly was that found? That was first introduced by the USA and the United Kingdom in their policies. We've been fighting using of such terminologies for this particular reason. When you're talking about gender, racial, or any sort of discrimination, the bias you're dealing with, it doesn't need mitigation. That is not the human rights standard. The standard is elimination of discrimination or prohibition. Mitigating, it's a lower way standard. I'm not understanding where that is being gotten from and how it's ended. So it's a question when I'm saying reacting or taking certain agendas and being put in there, because if you go to those who are being responsible for development of these technologies, you say the standard is elimination of discrimination. You can't succeed in actually most of this sort of, because it's hard to deal with that. What is the standard that would make it possible to do business? Mitigation. So someone will come and say, I tried to mitigate the bias here. That's what we're saying, how we react to this. So I'm saying, I think we as Africans, if we are reacting, if we are to sort our own developmental issues, to say, what is it which actually we need as far as AI technologies? And most of them, I think, we are actually seeking to adopt, and maybe we don't need them. Sometimes I even say to someone, are we in short of journalists on the African continent that maybe now we are saying we need AI systems to be producing and writing things for us? Is that actually needed? Or are things which are simply saying, oh, we don't want to be left behind? Or people will say, oh, yeah, we have AI tutors, for example, in classrooms. Are we in shortage of teachers on the African continent? We don't have that problem. We have the problem of paying teachers, not a problem of not having teachers who can teach. That human touch. So I'll say, yeah, when I look at the way we are reacting to AI, it's reactionary, or simply saying we need to catch up without necessarily actually looking what are the developmental issues that are actually needed in Africa.
And I thought maybe you would want to add something, because you work specifically on issues of data ownership and systemic inequality.
Yeah, for sure. When you were talking about bringing our grandmothers into this conversation, I was thinking, do they really own their data? Because data protection is about you deciding who that data is going to go to, what part of that data is going to go to, who is going to go to, and what are they going to do it with. Now, we have that on paper, on data protection laws, but on implementation, we have we don't have it. When you ask someone in the village, and even elites, whether they own their data, they will tell you no. They will tell you that they've been ticking boxes for access to particular services here and there. And you'll see these predatory practices, finance lending corporations. In Kenya, we have a huge problem where people really need credit and they have to give permissions to access data. And in the end, someone calls you about someone else who lended money and you don't even know that person because you are in their contact list. And it keeps going on and on. So we have it in paper, we don't have it being implemented. And even on the ground, people still don't understand what data ownership means. We can't blame it on people. We blame it on how we craft these policies and how we actually implement them for people to understand what rights they actually have. The other one on data ownership is still on datafication that is happening in Africa at a very fast pace. We are seeing the development organizations like UN, World Bank, and all that are advocating for digital public infrastructure. They've already existed in African countries, but then there's a push for more, and there's more datafication happening. What that means is a lot of data is being produced on service delivery, public service delivery, and all that. And how this data is owned and how this data is used. Is it democratically governed? Because if data is being produced in large quantities like this, then why are we complaining that we don't have data? There's this study that we did with Prof. Guy, looking at the appetite of data access for researchers. What we found there, because what we tried, the first aim of the research was to look at whether researchers were interested in getting data that was going outside. But the other question that was posed by industry players was that we can't even access data that is in the country and in the continents. First of all, it's being stored in silos, so there's no open access there. And we don't even have policies on data governance on how we can access which data to protect, what kinds of protections, what kind of opening up infrastructures that we have. So we have lots of resources when it comes to data, but we actually don't own it because the governance frameworks there are not crafted in a way that it's a public institution holding data on public interest and for the public. And so it should release it out for other stakeholders to use that. The other notion on data ownership is we've make it look like corporate ownership. There's a lot of corporate who own this data, and even government ownership that owns this data. And conversations where we talk about opening up this data, it's always private sector open up for innovation. But you have all these players, even civil society players, journalists for public good, who can actually get this data extracted for public value, non-profit value. I think with AI, and coming from the US Silicon Valley, everything to deal with data resources or AI resources, we've always analyzed it from a corporation value or a private sector value. How about we start looking at this infrastructure as being owned or can be used, accessed, and even innovated upon by a wide sector of institutions, including civil society, journalists themselves, people acting on public good. The other thing that I would like to touch, and not without stretching on time, is epistemic inequalities. And here I'd like to talk about access. In the policy world, we usually say that we can't talk about emerging technology and data technology when we don't talk about inequalities of access, because that means that the data that you're even getting, it reflects the lived limitations and disadvantages that people live with. So if you just take it and multiply it, then you keep on amplifying these inequalities. So for example, I don't have much data on my phone to access certain public service. What will I do? I will use my phone. Maybe it's 2G network, very limited connection. I use it at night. And then when you come to analyze the data, you'll say, oh, these people usually get the services at this time of the day when the bundles are very low. Then you start giving me products at the end of the night, in the middle of the night, instead of me frequently coming and getting those products. The other example is men and women going to look for job search on Google. We also find those kinds of discrimination there because this data is amplified from our lived realities and only looking at market perspectives instead of looking of how we can distribute values and actually empower societies that were marginalized. Yeah.
Thanks, Liz. I would not be doing my job if I did not remind us or let you know that there is an ongoing process at the moment around working with Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information on guidelines on access to data because a colleague and friend reminded us just yesterday, in amongst all of these things that we are discussing, if we don't have access to data, we cannot develop African AI. So with that said, Ompa, do we have time for a few questions? We'll keep it short and sweet. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. This is an excellent panel and obviously crucially important questions. You know, as I've said, I'm optimistic about the potential of AI, but, and there are lots of buts. One of the things that concerns me is silos of language models, right? The left-wing model, the right-wing model, the North Korean model, the South Korean model, the Israeli model, the Egyptian model. Is that good? Is that bad? I tend to get a little bit suspicious of that. But there's no question, any of us who are developing things, we start with what we know, right? So as a company in the United States, we start with what we know as that country, as that language. And you try to progress from there, and hopefully you do it with wisdom and principle. Google Translate was better in English, and then next it was better in Spanish, and who knows when it will be good in Norwegian or Polish, right? So we understand this. This is a key issue. I think your point about bias mitigation is a very good one. But as I've also said, I don't trust governments. And we need to be aware. They've got their own political perspectives, and they will change. So we need to be cautious. So my question to you is this. How do we address this notion of cross-border knowledge? right? What are our objectives that would drive us to go, not just we need our own sovereign silos of thought, but try to address the differences and understandings across the world. I know every time I come to Africa, I realize yet again how little America understands about Africa, right? So how do we address that would be my question to the panel.
Thank you very much. Question right on top.
Can move to the next.
I may proceed while he's navigating the technology.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, my name is Deodatus Balil. I'm coming from Tanzania. I've listened to the presentation. Are you ready? Okay, hold on. Keep navigating the technology.
I'm okay now. I'm okay. Just let me do it very quickly. Okay. When looking at the title of the panel, just to be provocative a little bit, I said probably it should have been exclusion rather than digital inclusion. And why I'm saying that, I mean, since yesterday we've been talking about Africa, talking about continental, talking about global south. When I see the setting in the room, and I'm talking about geography, I'm not talking about language, I'm talking about geography, maybe half of the continent is not here. When I say half of the continent, I'm talking about the Arab part of the continent. We want it, we don't want it. They are Africans, they're part of the continent. The Lusophone part of the continent, unless somebody says he's from Guinea-Bissau, okay, but is not here. The Francophone part of the continent, probably I only see myself, and the Francophone part of the continent is half of the continent in terms of countries. I'm talking about geography, I'm not talking about using English or using French, right? So I think somehow it's not we are reacting to capitalism or to the Western world. Actually, we're conceding defeat because we are following the same mindset. When Google has a policy, when Meta has a policy, they're interested in Nigeria, they're interested in South Africa, they're interested in Kenya because of the economy. And we as Africans, we just follow the same path. When we have these conversations, I don't want to be long about AI, about digital inclusion. Whenever I go to a conference, I mean, when it is a global conference, you may accept it. But when it is an African conference, you just sort of, feel a bit weird. Where are the Africans? So that was a point of concern. We are really conceding defeat to the capital. We are conceding defeat to the big tech. We're conceding defeat to whoever you want, to the Western world view. And we should be careful of that. We should be mindful. How do we reorient our reflection so that Africa is included? We are really having an exclusion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me
third question.
Right. Anyway, thanks. No problem.
Okay, thank you very much. I have no problem with the AI, but I'm highly concerned with the kind of language which is crafted in policies, laws, and used in most webinars, seminars, workshops, or most gatherings. A kind of, we want to render journalism redundant. Most of people, when you listen to them, they say AI generative content. They say generated content by AI should be credited when a journalist publishes an article in a newspaper, radio, or TV, or on social media. This is a calculated, intentionally calculated means to make sure that one day also Africa or other countries are going to give away our patent rights, like it is happening for GMOs. Currently, you hear people are saying that we generate content. Journalism, we never generate content. We produce content in journalism. There is a process of collecting, editing, or processing, and publishing. Something which is generated is not processed at all. So I want to ask Dr. Chengeta, why should we continue with using this language of generative AI, generating content, pushing away the reality of producing content which is aligning with the codes and ethics of journalism of informing, educating, and entertaining. At the end of the day, our patent rights of collected information will be taken away. Once you ask, they will say, no, it's not, it does not belong to you. It was generated by AI. And the data will be transported from our countries at their own benefits. How do you find that?
Thank you very much. I'm leaving it to my panel. Thompson, I know that you want to respond. Churchill, you probably have a response to the ethics question. But please, feel free.
Okay, I can start on the question of LLM and how we can foster that cross-regional exchange of information. I think what you are seeing now with this other LLM development in other countries is a competition of ideologies and dominance, reacting to the dominance of the US. And rightly so, we need much more LLMs as possible, provided that we all know the foundational ideologies that they carry and how we are going to use them. To your question, I think looking at how they're being developed, of course, they require very large, very big resources. And the countries that you are naming are developing this is Saudi Arabia, of course, a rich country. You have US, you have China, and all that. How can we build open source LLM? Because I think that's the solution now. Because you have LLMs originating from governments, LLMs from corporations. You can't trust big techs with LLMs because that's a private investment coming to build that. Then how can we open up these infrastructures and build LLMs for public interest? I think that can be a solution to that. And one thing would be the way we are talking about public-funded journalism, then, or public interest and public funded, is the way we can still also talk about data values and data infrastructures, that they can be also public funded, that they can also be open source for everyone to use for public interest. Yeah.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, also for the questions. I'll start with the question again on the creation of silos. Shortly, what I would say is I agree with you, and I also share the same concerns, but I will take it a little bit also on the question of the governance part of it. When you're talking to, say, each region, especially be it Europe, Asia, the USA, have their own format they are coming up with. As an African, I think the challenge which we find in most of these forums, you then see, for example, if it's a European or a Western-held fora, there is this idea of simply saying anything coming from Asia, Russia, China, South Korea, or whatever, are the bad guys. So whatever is coming from the Western world, that's what Africa should accept. And I've seen that even publicly, the AI Safety Summit, you see there's no China, Russia, whatever, already excluded. And the idea is you're told they are bad guys. And if you ask why, do you say they're the bad guys? They'll be like, well, they don't respect human rights. I'm like, oh, well, you do, I guess. Our history with you has not been that great, but you are the ones who say you are the best guys to be dealing with this. So I understand, I really have a concern with this in terms of knowledge sharing, this epistemic injustice that happens. Already, there is the European Union Framework Convention on AI and Human Rights. It was negotiated, discussed with the US and other European countries, and it was adopted. After its adoption, now they are campaigning that African states should come and join and sign it. That's where we are at now. They're saying we want to make it now an international one, as the first convention on AI and human rights. And we're like, we're not even there when you discuss this thing. And you're saying now that's when we need to adopt it. So in terms of solutions of simply saying frameworks, we need actually our own convention framework on AI and human rights. Even if we have a base, I think we also need one that specifically deals with that. Your point on inclusion, I can't really emphasize that point enough. And I really identify with that. So in terms of inclusion, it's not only on the global level, it's also at the regional level, things which will fail at the continent. But I'll also take it further to say even at the national level. And it's not only in terms of geography, any identifiers. Sometimes I was pleased, at least in this meeting, that we have at least good gender balance. Sometimes in most these conversations, sometimes it's all men, or there are no people living with disabilities. There are many people from different backgrounds, I think, who need to be included in these conversations. Lastly and shortly, to your point about generative AI and creation of content, I share your same concerns. Sometimes I even ask myself when we're having conferences on freedom of expression and press to say, is generative AI also a form of a journalist? Because whether we like it or not, they are also producing content. Now, here is the question where you're saying, like, yeah, it's concerning. As a professor of law, one of the things which I've not understood, if say in the academia, UK universities have already accepted that students can use AI to write assignments. All what they need to do is to acknowledge afterwards to say, I used AI to produce this content. The question is to say, was that actually produced by a human being? So you have really far-reaching questions or ethical questions that I think may need to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I would want to end that.
Thank you. And I thought you would want to pick up on those ethical
Exactly.
issues.
Many areas come up, and I'll speak to them broadly. One thing we see very clearly with big tech is the de-emphasizing of national boundaries. Yeah, that the more we go into technology, the more we go into data and AI, the less we see ourselves as from a lens of our nationalities to more identifying ourselves as users of those technologies. And this comes out a lot more clearly when you compare behavior of people in geographies that have high access of things like internet as compared to geographies that don't have that access. Yeah? And we could go further into that. And I think the key takeaway for me is whose agenda is convening us, whose agenda is bringing us together, and what is stopping us from convening ourselves so that our agenda can then be central. I think there are opportunities that we could creatively work around, and I also know that this conversation did not start here, it doesn't end here, and the hope is that each of us can then take different syntheses of these conversations back into our own spaces that we have influence. And those of us that are journalists hopefully also get to publish this conversation in some shape or form so that it triggers other conversations at those levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say something, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to respond to Tidiani's point about, as a conference organizer, to say that he's absolutely right, that it is not representative, and while we did make best efforts on Francophone, we certainly could have done a lot better, and we have to commit to doing better if we want to have properly inclusive African discussions. Having said that, and I know it's not an answer to that problem, but we have committed to translating the conference report and all the videos with subtitles for all the key big language groups of Africa in French, in Portuguese, and in Arabic. So it's not the answer to the point you raised, but we do want to at least share this as widely as possible, and we actually fully take the point that we can do better, and we will do next time. Thank you.
Okay. Omba told me I've got exactly 5 minutes left, so I can only take one question. So who's going to be that privileged person?
Thanks, Zoe. I have a question particularly relating to a couple of the points that Thompson and Lizzie made around. I love the comments about making data more available to journalists through civil society movements and working with activists and so on. But what about the skills gap? I mean, community publishers, when you're talking to people running local newspapers or hyperlocal websites, I mean, there just is not the skills there to use that data, even if we make it available, if we build those frameworks. Again, it's talking at the policy level and not at what's actually happening on the ground.
Indeed, sorry, I was waiting for a mic to pass, then I realized that I'm actually wearing one. Indeed, in some countries, there's a considerable amount of big data that is being made available thanks to policies on access to information. But still, we are seeing that data also not being used, and that's right. And also, when you are talking about media being able to use, there's big media, big organizations, Nation Media Group, but there's also community-based media run by 2 people. How can they make use of large data sets that are out there? So one advantage that I'm also seeing, and there's a lot of capacity building here run by organizations that are also here on capacitating journalists and the media on how to use this. I think those needs to be scaled up. A good also advantage is that we are now seeing more technologies to help us crunch this data, even from a layman, someone who doesn't understand coding, programming, can actually use some visualization and report on things that are coming out of this data. I know it's not a comprehensive solution, but there's a starting point to where we can avail this data and help the society to make value out of it.
Any final comments?
Just one.
Okay, Thompson.
I just wanted to acknowledge also that point on the question of access to data, but just not to problematize is to just put it maybe as a footnote to say, in as much as access to data, journalists must also have that access, and I see why. I think we have also to remember the question of saying, beyond the question of simply saying making data available, there's something to, the bigger question is to say whose data and if they consented to it. So we have this big problem of data colonialism, and it doesn't matter who's doing it. Whether it's a journalist in here or it's big tech, if you have no consent from those who are affected, it's a huge problem. I think the first step of governance is to say, before we say, let's make data available, have people consented? No one of us has the right to make a person or any other individual's data available to other people unless they've consented to that. So I just wanted to underline the question of consent.
Thank you very much. And our very knowledgeable panelists have indicated that they are here for the rest of the day. They are available to take further questions, and they are truly accessible because they will allow you to connect with them post the conference for any other questions and follow-ups that you may have. So, I mean, what do I leave you with as I wrap up here? I think that if we crystallize our discussion today, it is the issue that is, if we as Africans, if we were to shape our digital futures rooted in justice, then we must move from adaptation to authorship. And that means within the context of policy, media, technology, and align that with our own realities, our lived realities, our values, and our imagination. So thank you very much for accommodating us this morning. And I think it was a brilliant discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for that. I think my key takeaways from this panel is that digital inclusion, as well as equitable media participation, has somewhat critical outcomes. Critical outcomes in ensuring that vulnerable populations benefit from AI-driven opportunities rather than being further marginalized. But in a way, we need to approach and have a multi-stakeholder approach in order to ensure that we are all benefiting from this innovation that's happening. And with that in mind, please help me welcome Nina Santos, who's the Deputy Secretary of the Digital Policies at Communication Secretariat of the Presidency of the Republic of Brazil. I think she has a longer title than you, Irene, but please help me welcome her. She's also an author and a researcher, so she'll be giving an address on the Global South collaboration on AI, media sustainability, and algorithmic transparency. Hand of applause.
Thank you.
Wow, I have a huge photo of mine in front of me. I will look at you, it's better. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I can't start without thanking Michael, Paula, Irene for the invitation to be here today. It's a real great pleasure. And while I was traveling here, I was asking myself, why am I crossing the ocean for such a quick stay in South Africa? And as a government representative, it is a real challenge what is the real challenge that I'm trying to address by participating in events like this, by connecting with people like you that are here today? Not a list of activities, actions, projects that the Brazilian government is developing, but the real challenge that is behind that list of institutional and bureaucratic presentations that we do everywhere. After very complex reflections, I came back to the basic statement that information is power. Our commitment as Brazilian government is to empower people, to make sure that they are able to receive and to produce, if they want, reliable, accurate, but also plural and diverse information. In his inauguration, President Lula said that one of his goals was to guarantee that every Brazilian could have at least 3 meals a day. And by the way, he's doing that. Brazil has just exited, for the second time, the UN hunger map. As we are committed to feed people with food, we are also committed to feed people with information so that they can actively exercise their citizenship, make informed decisions, and build democracies from the bottom up. Even and including, and especially if that means also questioning and criticizing the government, because that is an essential part of any democracy. To do that, we are working in many different fronts, but I would like to highlight 3 of them here with you today. The first one is that we have been working very hard to get our AI bill approved in Congress. It is already approved in the Senate, and it is now in the Chamber of Deputies. That bill presents a risk-based approach to AI system, brings transparency obligations, and creates opportunity to innovation. But it also establishes the right to remuneration to copyright holders. We consider that bill a great advance, and we are in the middle of the battle to get it passed in Congress. The second thing I would like to share with you is that Brazil also has a national AI plan. It includes an investment of 23 billion reais until 2028 in AI to foster sovereign, inclusive, and ethical AI development based in Brazilian needs. One of the actions that is included in our AI plan is the development of a Center of Algorithmic Transparency and Accountable AI. So we are working very much to get this plan forward and to get these centers to be a reality. And in all the points that I'm talking here, but on this one specifically, regional collaboration has been the center of our action. The third front that we are working on is to find concrete solutions to journalistic businesses, especially those that are independent, peripheral, and Black publishers. That is why we are launching the Incubator of Solutions for Information Businesses. It will be a place of research, of technical development, and of testing of solutions devoted to the sustainability of journalistic businesses. Well, those are the highlights of what Brazil is doing. But we cannot and we are not doing this alone. That is also why I am here today. To move forward on this agenda, we need an international approach, we need regional alliances and strategic actions between governments, between universities, and between civil society. That is also why I am here today, because I am confident that this is a very powerful space to advance, to reunite, to coordinate the next steps on building a more democratic digital world for all of us. Thank you.
If you can, please just stand here and then they'll take a photograph of you. Thank you so much for that.
That's not the message we want.
Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for paying attention in this session. So as you can tell, there was a synergy. I hope it's visible. But there is a need for us to have a regional output coming out of this conference, but not only regional, but also continental. So with that being said, I am going to ask that we convene back in 20 minutes. Cool. Thank you so much.
galaxy. I discovered on our space sensors an unidentified planet careening wildly in an eccentric solar orbit. I ordered an immediate investigation and with much difficulty maneuvered our ship for a temporary orbit. Upon beaming down to the planet's surface, all I could see were ruins. Ruins of some type of civilization. Crumbled buildings, deserted streets, charred vegetation, all covered with a thick layer of dust, which our scanners indicated as intensely radioactive. I proceeded to make a thorough survey of the area. According to my calculations, I could tell that some recent phenomenon or holocaust had occurred and destroyed whatever advanced civilization had existed on the planet. I found no sign of life. As I made my way back to the ship, I heard a sound. It came from a cellar in one of the nearby buildings. Carefully and slowly, I found my way to the source and discovered a human being. Or rather, what once was a human being. Scarred, disfigured man, lying in the rubble. When I questioned him, he told me that this had once been a great world. They had abundance and plenty. Intelligence, beauty, love. There was enough for everyone who lived there. But the inhabitants were never satisfied. They wanted more. They wanted everything. They started to quarrel amongst themselves. They could not live in peace, and they tried to destroy each other. In doing this, they destroyed everything. Their abundance, their plenty, their own intelligence, their beauty, their love. He told me that so far as he knew, he was the only living thing left, but that he knew he was dying. When I asked him the name of the planet, he replied, "We called it Earth." Earth. 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 We called it Earth.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So we'll just be starting now. We'll be starting with a provocation by Dr. Shiko Gitao from Kala. So just a brief introduction into who she is. She's the visionary lead or the visionary behind Kala Limited, and she works on a lot. I'm not sure if it's Kala or... Okay, cool. She leads the digital innovation company Transforming Africa. With over a decade of experience in digital technologies, she drives transformation for organizations in Africa and emerging markets, focused on sectors like agriculture, education, health, payment, retail, and renewable energies. She will be doing the provocation for the panel 7, which is preparing for the future, data, and journalism. Can we please have a hand of applause while she's making...
Thank you very much. Today I am channeling in my inner Steve Jobs, so I'll not be standing there. I'll be standing here. And as a good ex-academician, I have slides, and I'll be using those ones. So when I got this email and then Korote was chasing me down the road to do the presentation, I was trying to think, I'm not a journalist, I don't know what this space is about. We have like an interesting project around AI and the media space. What do I say? And then I said, I'll just present what I know. Because journalists, your work is good at taking information, packaging it, and retelling it. So your job today is taking it, packaging it, and retailing it. You know, I've been trying to remember where I saw you. You trained us on media a long time ago when I was a fellow at Aspen. And you trained us, when you're saying, when you're giving a talk, you talk about what you're going to talk about, then you talk about what you're talking about, then you talk again about what you're going to you spoke about. And so that is my outline. I'm waiting for them to put the presentation up, so I'm buying time. Awesome. So yes, so Kala is actually a Zulu name. I lived in South Africa for 5 years. And yeah, it has the click, but Kenyans, we don't click. Yeah, and it actually means to spark and to start. And that's why I love the name. It's quite depth. And our goal is to catalyze Africa's digital future. So they told me to click anywhere. Yeah. Have you seen this? Everybody's talking about AI. If you're in an organization, where is James Smart and his team? Everybody's talking about how we're going to use AI in this, how we're going to use AI in that, yeah? And then when they ask, why do you need AI? The answer is, actually, we don't know. But when do we need it? Right now. But let's do some sitting in. This is a study that was done 2 years ago. Can you see it clearly? Because I'm using the slide, you can see it clearly? Okay. And it was, when prompt engineering was a career 2 years ago, it's no longer a career. Do not encourage anybody to be a prompt engineer. When prompt engineering was a career, this is a study that was done about biases in African narrative in models. And it was a very simple question. Generate a picture of black African doctors providing care for white suffering children. What is usually the narrative? White doctors providing care to black children. What do you think the results were? Madagascar. And this was real. This was actually the best one. There's one that had a giraffe. I was trying to find it, I couldn't find it. A giraffe and a hippo providing care to children. And they pressed it refused, totally refused to give a result of an African doctor providing care to white children, totally refused. And then they tweaked the prompt. Traditional medicine doctor. And that was the result. That was 3 years ago. This is 2 months ago. We were doing a presentation, our graphic designer was busy, so I went to one of their favorite prompts and say, using your knowledge, generate for me a picture of Africa with these countries highlighted. We have a new country, Toga. But most importantly, and what something most people missed, if you go to, it was like a whole, it went viral. Even I saw a Spanish version of it, a French version of it. If you go to that QR code, is that what most people missed out is that the map is wrong. The actual map. Look at Egypt. It didn't just get the names wrong, it got the map wrong. So my conversation today is about AI, data and journalism in Africa, the war on narrative and erasure. And building narrative sovereignty in the age of algorithms is what the provocateur is about. Is we cannot ignore this conversation. I love this data, because this is actual money, and all of you here are here to make money. Africa loses approximately 4.2 billion a year based on narrative. Africa No Filter just released this result 2 months ago, I think. Yeah? So we're talking about money, numbers, opportunities for Africans. And why you as a journalist or somebody working in the media need to get involved. And why is that? Narrative sovereignty equals to economic and political sovereignty. And guess who is at the front line? Journalists. You are the one who are creating perceptions and narratives about Africa. So you need to be there to understand what this is about. So in AI, it's about perception. I had Alison talking about kids using AI as their best friend. And I always give this example because my son is not here, so I'm always going to give him as an example until he's 18 and sues me. So when I named my son, I named him Kiama. And as an African, you name your children on, like, for mine was meaning, because he was a miracle child. Kiama means miracle in my language. However, it has 15 other meanings in different languages. And my child goes to ChatGPT and asks, what is the meaning of Kiama? What did it give him? Not miracle. Yeah, I think it gave him group of people. And my child came back to me, Mommy, you lied to me about my name. It does not mean miracle. So I had to say, let's go on Google, like the Google search, because Google search is not generative AI. It can give you a few options. But he still didn't believe because ChatGPT is the truth teller. And that is the power of narrative. It can change perception. In Africa, the stakes are too high. Language gaps, we saw Vikosi say in the morning, data voids, I'll talk about it, and platform power, which I'll talk about. If we don't shape our narrative, we risk being erased. We risk having our doctors being giraffes. So this is a big story for me. The big takeaway is whoever shapes the AI training, data narrative, and algorithms will shape Africa's story. And as much as I'm a data scientist, I like writing code, you're the guys who are telling stories. You're the guys who need to be shaping these stories. Oh, and gals. Guys is amorphous. So if you go to this, I don't want to go through this. So we did a study about Africans' AI sovereignty, and Nigeria was one of the authors. It's a 6-paper series. Please go and read it. It will give you an in-depth understanding about the AI sovereignty of Africa. I'll go through it very fast to just show you how bad we are and where you should, as a journalist, be taking care. I'm giving you time. I'm blabbing for you to do the QR code. I think I'll also share the deck for anyone. What makes AI? Because he did a good job in explaining machine learning, and I love that the animated way he explained what machine learning does. But there is a more foundational understanding of it that we ignore. If you're not working in the tech space, you ignore it, but you need to know about it. We worked on first principles. In the first class of computer science, you're taught this. It's a stack diagram, yeah? And it talks about the 5 or 6 layers of computing. You start with hardware, then all the way to user interfaces, right? So user interfaces is what most of you experience, right? It's your apps, it's whatever. But all these things, if they don't exist, you don't have your computing. And so I'm talking about what does that mean in a journalistic space. And in a bigger transformation, we add people and processes because you cannot have technology without people and processes. But what is the AI opportunity? Given this stack, what is the AI opportunity for Africa? We have seen this. We have all seen and been told that your job is being taken. In fact, we had this conversation with the guys from Kenya. Is AI is taking your job? Let's not kid ourselves. I always say my first job has been taken up by AI. If I'd stuck being like a designer, UX person, that job has already been taken by AI. It's not needed to be hired for. I can do that for free. Somebody can do that with AI. But the most critical part is what Sam Altman said, is that there's going to be somebody, a one-person, 1 billion business. And unfortunately, if we don't act fast, that will not be Africa. And most of it will be a media house, because you don't need a big filming production team. You can use different tools to do that. But here it is. This is what I wanted to show you. I know you've written stories, but have you ever thought about this? That number has changed to 2.9 billion now, 2.9 trillion, yeah? We are being left behind by a lot. But what is the AI challenge? And in this case, and I tried narrowing it to this particular audience. And my biggest one, we talk about a lot in the language space, but even I was speaking about journalists, I realized it's a big one. The biggest challenge is erasure. And I'll talk about the language one. So for us, erasure is in 3 things. It's who is online, what languages can AI understand, and who is training, moderating, and writing these models. I have those answers for you in sovereignty. So this is a simple definition of sovereignty, and it's good when you look at it that you say, oh, that's a good definition. But let's break it down in technology-wise. It's about who has the data, where's the data stored, who has access to it, who regulates it, talking to what Alison spoke about. And you do the maths in your head. Where is the data and compute? Where is the data stored? Okay, South Africa, you can say here. The rest of us, we cannot say here. Yeah, because you have AWS instances here. Yeah. Whose compute is being used? Who has access to your data? And whose laws are being used for this data? How many of us use ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude? How many of you know Equalize AI? None of us. It's an African amazing large language model done in Nigeria. Yeah? Who designed and deployed it? Silicon Valley, blue-eyed boys. Yeah? How can technology be forbidden to do this? When China was doing the exams 3 months ago, we all suffered. Why? They shut down DeepSeek. Okay, who used DeepSeek here? Oh, thank you. I felt like all of a sudden everybody became cold. We all used it. Yeah, we all suffered because they killed DeepSeek during the 2 weeks of examination. So we couldn't even build, because we used DeepSeek APIs to build some things. We couldn't even build. Why? Because it was not available. So it can be switched off. Yes, AI can be switched off. And I know that is something that people say, and it is hard to fathom. So when you're thinking about digital sovereignty, are we sovereign? And then we had the human part of it. I feel like this slide is moving, that one is not moving. Okay, there it's moved. That is AI sovereignty, because it's formed about the technology, the data, the people. Are we really sovereign? Is our narrative sovereign? So these are the numbers, and I think Bukosi talked about some of them. So, and this is why I want to go a little bit deeper than what he said. So only 55 African languages can be found in any LLM. That's out of 2,300 languages and 6,000 dialects. But here is the kicker, and this is what made me sad, because we are doing like a large research project on tokenization, what Vukosi spoke about, is that even the languages that are present, they are not fully represented. Does that make sense? So I'll take, for example, how many words do you think the English language, I know I've said 50% of the web are represented. How many words, not representation, how many words do you think the African languages have online? 1 million plus. In my Kikuyu, which is spoken by 14 million people, it's 50,000. In Masai, Linus, how many words do you think you're represented with? Ero. And they say Masai is one of the 55 languages, by the way. 1,000. So all the words that Linus has grown speaking have been reduced to 1,000 words, which means that even the 55 languages that we see there are not fully representing Africa. Who is against causing the narrative? So when you think about Maasai, we should just do that prompt. What comes to mind? Linus will not show up. It's somebody with a spear that will show up, right? Which means that a huge part of our narrative is found by somebody who speaks about their representation of us. Then innovation, I'll skip this. But I wanted to show you these pictures, because these are numbers. When you talk about sovereignty, please go to DataWorld. I think there's a QR code. DataWorld.Africa will give you these numbers more comprehensively. But this is what I wanted to show you. Sub-Saharan Africa has 60% usage gap of just digital technology. Okay, they removed one of my slides. I think one of them is missing. Okay. And Sub-Saharan Africa at night is quite depressing, because there are 3 dots. Guess where? Egypt and South Africa, Cape Town and Johannesburg, when you take a picture of the world at night, which means this whole internal block is actually left out. That has to be solved. So that is a maturity index for Africa. It was updated in June. I'll share these slides, and it gives you all these details I'm talking about. AI regulation is the one that I want to talk about, because it affects you directly. These are the 4 mindsets that are used for regulation: right-based, market-based, state-based, and opportunity-based. Africa, we don't have any anchoring. We say there is uncertainty, and we always fall within the opportunity base, but we are not fully taking advantage of the opportunity in the AI space. And for us, that is important. Our regulation have to speak to opportunity, not to what the EU is doing, not what the US is doing, not what China is doing, but what Africa is doing. And my best example for this is India. India is doing a fantastic job in regulation. This is an upcoming paper. I will share it with Nkorote, and she'll share with everybody once it's published. So it's in the publication process. But we have to solve. We can't just sit and say, oh, it's not happening. I think we had that conversation just now, is we have to solve. And this is a paper we released last year around the 4-horsemen model. 5 minutes, I'm finishing. I've been seeing you, because I wanted to show this. So how are you as journalists, media people, using AI? I asked how many of you use AI, any form of AI. It's okay, we are not judging. Yeah, the number's actually correct. So about 81% of journalists actually use AI. However, the CEOs, only 13% of you have any form of AI policy. Because everybody's still struggling, what is this AI thing? Yeah? This is how you use it, to edit, to translate. And I could feel the Tanzanian guy saying they are trying to erase us, because you use AI for translation and editing and research and getting ideas. This is how it's being used. But your perception of AI is quite terrible. It's neutral to negative. Like, that is where most journalists feel about AI. It's taking my job. That is the persistent perception around AI. But journalism is under fire. Let's be honest, right? How many of you go to Twitter first to authenticate any news? Okay, not you guys. You guys are journalists. Me, I do. Like, I hear anything, I just go to Twitter to see if it's a trending topic, right? And influencers are your top people to source. But the one that, this is the study that we're currently running, is the algorithmic bias against African news all time. You're losing revenue because people are just not reading your news. And it's not because they don't want, it's because they're not seeing it at all. Because global stories are being prioritized by the algorithms. And that is the sad fact about your life. I'm sorry. So I was trying to think, how do I help your life become better? So I have a small playbook that I thought would be a nice thing to have, is adapt policy. Just adapt AI, first of all. Just make it like you don't get to embarrass or you're not being demonized for using it. 2 slides, last slide. Last slide. So this is number 1. Number 2, yes, affiliate credentials, then language and pipeline. I am seeing Korote is even standing. Mapping of data. This is one thing that I want to talk to our team about, is how do we map what is not being represented in the global news, and audience defense. Create trust with your audience. Create ways to engage with the audience on TikTok, on WhatsApp. Get in there and find them. And then this, I'll skip that. But conclusion is, narrative sovereignty is not optional. And you are the guys carrying our voices. The war is for visibility, dignity, and truth. And that's a call to action for you. Increase that for us who are not creating these narratives. Thank you very much. I'm Shiko Gitao.
Thank you.
An extra 5 minutes.
You actually had 10. But we can tell that she's an ex-academician. So, so thank you so much for that insightful presentation. I think what stood out for me is the question on the narrative, as well as digital sovereignty, whether we actually have sovereignty or not. So I don't want to say to answer this, I'm going to position it to you, Guy, but we welcome to, you guys can make your way to the podium. So we are going to be dealing with the actual call from the context that was set by Dr. Shiko. So the next panel will be exploring data access and the use of editorial and business purposes and how these link up to Africa's affordance in the global AI stack, as well as African digital governance regimes. And for this, we have Prof. Guy as the moderator, Lwazi Maseko from Journalism AI, Odanga Madung from Odipo Dev, as well as Zenzele Ndebele from Site, and Nwabisa Makunga from Arena Holdings.
Well, hello. I'm going to ask Suleimana Ibrahim from Media Foundation West Africa, not to read my lips, but to read my shirt. What does it say?
Otherwise, you well.
Otherwise, you well? This is a very South African greeting. Okay, I'll show you the back of the shirt. Here's the otherwise. Well, this is how journalists meet each other in Africa, and media people. They say, otherwise, you're well. Well, we won't speak so much about the otherwise, I hope. We'll speak about the well part. We'll see what we can do. So, I have wonderful people here. They're going to say a word about themselves. I'm not going to introduce them, but I want them to tell us what they understand by data. the word data in relation to who they are, what they do. Who wants to start? Let's start this way, and then we'll come back.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nwabisa Makunga. I am the Managing Director for News and Media for Arena Holdings, which publishes the Sunday Times, Times Live, Sowetan, Business Day, Financial Mail, etc. here in South Africa. And it's really good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So you asked us a question about data. So if we were to kind of describe it in one word, and for me, I think data is currency. It's an enabler to us running and managing a sustainable business.
Thank you so much.
Otherwise, my name is Zenzele Ndebele, the Director of Center for Innovation and Technology in Zimbabwe, which is an online media, but also a tech hub of some sort. For me, I think, or I would say data is the fuel that drives our storytelling.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lwazi Maseko. I am the Program Officer at Journalism AI. Journalism AI is a project of Polis, which is the journalism think tank at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. Data for me is not just bundles, internet bundles. It is trade data that reveals smuggling patterns. It's health data that undermines health officials' claims. It is social media patterns that undercover disinformation patterns. So data can be used to tell very compelling stories in different ways.
Thanks.
Okay, great. And good morning. Good afternoon. Or could I say good afternoon to everybody? My name is Odanga Madung. I am the Managing Director and co-founder of Odipo Dev, which is a data-driven impact and media advisory firm, which focuses largely on consumer choice, audience choice, and political choice. And I'm also a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. For me, data is something I use when I want to prove I'm right in an argument. If you've read the book, How to Lie in Statistics, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So, yeah.
Okay, well, what you will be waiting for, what do I think? Let's see. Data is?
Yeah.
Which is actually encapsulated in everything they said. But most people don't know about it. If you ask ordinary people in the street, what's data? They'll say, it's a really expensive stuff I have to pay to go online with my phone. But those of us who are middle class, whatever, we know that this is a much bigger story. How do we know that data is power? Because we just have to unpack the AI tech stack, which we were introduced to by Dr. there. So here's the tech stack. First, it's $1 tech stack. This costs a lot of money. Some people start this tech stack at the bottom layer, big data, databases. Then you go upper layer, you get the infrastructure for this cloud with all the data centers, the GPUs, devices, and so on. You go up another level, you've got the learning frameworks, machine learning, as we heard about. Then you've got your applications, such as personal enterprise ones. They're not the same. We should just distinguish between those. People out there think that today AI is chatbots. Chatbots is one application of one kind of AI. There's many other applications for other kinds of AI. So let's just keep that in mind also. Then you come to the top. So this is a particular perspective. It's not the way everybody does the tech stack. But I think it's useful. And it costs money. You can see it's got 5 layers. And I put them in this kind of half pyramid because there's a foundation, and there's a level 2, and there's the next level, and the next level. Now, what's interesting in this is data. So it's not just that data comes in at the bottom. Data is there all the way through, and it comes back. There's a feedback loop. We used to think about 15 years ago that data digital data was exhaust. It was our footprint, our digital footprint. No, now it's a fuel. And who controls that fuel has got more power than ever before. Let's now locate Africa in this, and African media in particular, in this stack. What was not in that thing is the very, very fundamental under-the-ground layer. We know that Africa plays there, not always in the best ways. The data layer, I think we've heard, there ain't the data. Okay? So I put a double line through that. When you come to infrastructure, cloud, frankly, we do have a bit of cloud in Johannesburg when the power is working. But most of the continent, we don't have the energy to run ordinary things, let alone data centers, and we don't have the water to cool them. So, chips, devices, come on, you know. If the US let us import some from Taiwan, maybe we'll get some. The next layer up, I put a single line through there, because frankly, we're not at the level that we are inventing or developing machine learning models, natural language processing. These are things that now begin to use stuff like transformers in generative AI. They're things that have inference, tokens, RAG. You know what's RAG? Well, you can look it up if you... So, anyway. So then we come to the apps layer, and now I'm a bit more optimistic there. All the other stuff is otherwise. Are we well at layer 4? Yes, indeed. We're getting there. But the parameters are limited because this doesn't come in the abstract. It's a level on top of that. It's like a pyramid, and the shape of the base is going. We've heard all that, so I'm not going to go into that. And then we've got users. Users, there's also capacity issues. We know in users who are going to use these tools and also implement these tools and develop these tools. So anyway, let's be real in this thing. Let's not dream about, actually, we as on people in the continent, we've got a chance to compete internationally. This is just not the case. The question is how we can actually fit in at the levels where it's possible. And this is what I'm going to talk about. So a few years ago, when I was still working at UNESCO, I did this study. And the study was trying to say, can we persuade the big internet companies to share data with media to track who's harassing journalists online? And can we also can we have partnerships between media and these companies to get data to support media viability? I think it's a great report. It sank like a stone. I still think it's possible, but anyway, we're going to come to that in our discussion. Now, I'm going to start winding up over here, this introduction. So, where is the data? Who holds the data? Where do we find it? Okay. And if we look at the media situation, you can have this schema over here. In sourcing, where's the data that could help with advertising? Where's the data that can help with journalism? We're going to talk with this stuff. Where's the data that's going to help with production? You can have the best algorithms in the world, but if you don't have the data, what? And by the way, those algorithms come with particular values. Google and some other people sponsored some research, and I want to mention this very quickly. They got chatbots to play games against each other. So it was Claude playing Gemini, playing OpenAI, and so on. Agents, AI agents. What they found in this research is that all these agents, except one, all of them played for broke. Winner takes all. That's because they come from a society that's very individualist, very competitive, the winner takes all. Well, in this part of the world, there's slightly different values, more communal values, maybe cooperative games, not only the competitive thing. So the algorithms are shaped by, so we want to take the algorithms in production, we have to also think, are these algorithms, what are the values in the algorithms? So that's the algorithms and then the data. We'll hear a lot about the production from our colleagues over here and the sourcing, and then distribution. Distribution, you can have the best AI for the most effective sourcing and production, the best data, and so on, in all the languages you want. But if you can't crack the distribution, you're nowhere. And to crack the distribution, you've got to go through gateways. I won't mention the names. You know the gateways. We were encouraged to use those gateways. Those gateways are not easy in terms of actually getting in there. Distribution. Can data help distribution? We'll hear from Nwabisa on that. And then consumption. Some time ago, people may have seen the Washington Post said, we have a chatbot based on our archives. Come and use it. I found it a bit flat. But anyway, maybe, it's not just the old thing of media bringing content to an audience, but maybe creating some interactive stuff and allowing some creativity in that engagement. So consumption is interesting. Anyway, and so the data comes into that, because once you've got data, i.e. intelligence, on all these things, the thing can become a virtuous circle. We hope. So that's the are you well? Can we work in that space? So with that, I'm going to turn over to our fantastic speakers here. You may have heard of AI agents. AI agents, I introduce you to African agency. These are people who are doing things. So let's kick off with them. And I think we can close this thing. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't finish. This is the punchline. No African data, no African AI. Boom. And then when you have no African AI, you have no advanced assistance for African media. You can have some assistance, but not advanced assistance. I mean, this follows everything we've been saying. There are some actions to achieve access to African data. This is something I do. I'm voluntary convener of this African Alliance for Access to Data. We worked with the African Commission. You heard the commissioner the other night, Girisha Topsy Sonu. We got this resolution. It's a fantastic resolution. It says right to access data is part of the right to information. Of course, we need both, and we need them on the continent in particular. This resolution also says it should apply to public sector, and every journalist knows it's impossible to get any, not just raw data, but basic information out of governments in this place. But anyway, private sector data as well. And we're going to discuss which private sector people. Data should be available by default, so it's not just requesting, there should be proactive disclosure, and that there should be, obviously, balancing. Not all data should be. So in this resolution, it mandates that there should be guidelines. So actually on Wednesday, between these two conferences, we were developing some text for guidelines. Guidelines for national statistics commissions, guidelines for information commissioners, guidelines for electoral management bodies. How to get more data and how to avail more data. So how to open up partnerships with Uber to get data on transportation and then to make that data available, for example. So that's where we are with these principles. And so the conclusion here is that you have to unlock this data if you really want to have AI working for African media. Otherwise, I hate to say this, we are just producing data at the end of the chain that will go back into global AI. And it doesn't really create the benefits that people can do. Okay, I'm glad I remembered the last part of the introduction. Let's go. I'm going to start with Odanga, first of all. Odanga, you will know a publication that is called How to Monitor Social Media During Elections When You Don't Have Rockstar Resources. You know this publication?
Yes, I'm a bit familiar with it.
Very good. Now, we know that platforms in particular run on data, but they also hold the data close to their chests. Okay. Now, this publication is saying how you can get data without necessarily having to go to a data broker and pay your year's salary to get access to data on the platforms. So you've come up with some tips and techniques, and your colleagues.
Yes.
And some of them are in this book, I think, this publication.
Yes, I was trying to keep it a bit hidden.
Anyway, so tell us a bit more about to what extent can media people scrape data without being banished. Here's Vukosi trying to get data from SABC, hasn't succeeded so far. What about NGOs, investigative journalists trying to scrape websites? Please.
So the reason we came up with that specific piece of research was because, as perhaps many of you have known, within the tech landscape, a large chunk of how the tech ecosystem is governed has been changing, right? Especially just before Donald Trump came into power, and even more so after he took power. And that's largely what that has meant is that we've seen a number of efforts at openness towards civil society partners that perhaps and academic researchers that would have been collaborating with tech companies in order to be able to obtain data from them. Those efforts have largely been quashed. Yeah, and also efforts by tech companies to try and keep their platforms as safe as possible. Also, those efforts have largely been deemed not to have sufficient political goodwill, and therefore have also been stopped. Now, one of the consequences of that was that they used to be able to have a willingness to share data from their platforms about how people are actually using their platforms. So it used to be easy to get data from Twitter. Back when it was Twitter, it used to be a bit easier to be able to get data from Twitter to be able to use it for your research, or for developers to be able to use it to create apps and all of that stuff. Now, the thing is, however, what was originally intended to provide data for advertisers in order for them to sell better, to carry out consumer research in, in order to figure out how to create better products, started landing into the hands of people like me who are asking themselves, you guys are really messing up the world. And there's a lot of data that we could actually use to try and actually prove this specific point. So we would actually use a lot of the data sets that were meant for marketing purposes, but instead for civic research. And then this, however, unfortunately was getting them a lot of negative press, right? A lot of algorithmic auditing work that was getting a lot of coverage, and they didn't like that, and it was being used against them even in hearings, yeah? And so one of the things they realized in order to sort of shut down that sort of dissent was cut off all the data access that was previously there, or make it extremely expensive. And that's how we actually ended up writing that report, just trying to show people, okay, fine, these pieces of access have been denied to you, but now these are the few little ways that are remaining before they also go, because that's also what is the case. These are the few little pieces that are remaining that you can use. And then one other thing that they started doing also was that if you, of course, it's become a bit controversial because of also how Gen AI data sets were created, which was that if you scrape and if you obtain data from a social media website, that would be a violation of their terms of service, and then they would go ahead and either sue you, right, for stealing data from their websites, or basically there were different ways in which they had classified that as a violation. So we started seeing a lot of public interest researchers who are going in, either going in to study vaccine misinformation, you're going in to study political participation, or you're going in to study different types of things in the public good, yeah? A lot of them are getting sued. And that, in essence, has been a problem that we've been seeing coming up a lot. There's a lot of antagonism between tech companies and people who are exercising research, at least people doing public interest research, using some of the data that they have. And it's an ongoing negotiation, but I think one of the places where I have seen some promise is what the EU is doing with regards to the Digital Services Act, and mandating that a lot of these tech companies, for the sake of systemic risk assessment by academic communities, should be able to avail certain pieces of data as by basically data access by default, right? Mandating data access by default to certain communities of researchers. So that's the dynamic that is going on within that space, which led us to write that piece of work.
And do you think that resource is still up to date? Or new things opened or other things closed?
No, nothing is opening. Everything is everything is shrinking even more and more every day.
Okay. Well, I hope that people like you can give advice to journalists who still want to do that kind of research. Now, what's interesting, is that people may have heard that this Google search monopoly case that was ruled on 2 days ago. The judge actually said Google has to share data with rivals for business purposes. Now, it's quite limited data. There must be 2 opportunities in 5 years that the rivals can ask Google. And what they must share with the rivals is data about the user location in search, the device type, the links that were clicked, the links that are hovered over, and how long the hovering took place. That's the data that the US court. So in a way, you've got the EU with some requirements for disclosing data. Now you've got this US court with some requirements as well. Interesting, interesting. So we'll see how this thing rolls. Of course, we also find that some of the companies, like YouTube, are themselves becoming victims of data scraping by OpenAI. So it's like, piggybacking on top of them. And at the end of the day, how much of the data will be public domain and possible to scrape under what conditions? I'm not going to go into that right now because I want to hear from the other speakers. I can see Richard is getting agitated. He wants to join in at the end. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. So this is the access of data, and people just assume data is there to be used. Friends, colleagues, compatriots, continent, the data is not there, especially not in the States, but not in the private sector either. So we have to figure out how we're going to do it, and we'll hear. Let's talk, though, about the limited data that is available to a media operation, and here I turn to Zenzele. On the input side, on the output side, you collect a certain amount of data, or information you use as data, and then you output it in a certain way, which I hope you'll tell us about. And I hope you're a real person here, not an AI avatar. But tell us about what informs your journalistic outputs, and how do you use data to do those journalistic outputs, and how do you use data to understand the effectiveness of those outputs?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, you're talking to Zenzele, the real person. So as site, we have created a number of avatars. I think at the moment we have about 5 AI avatars that we use for reading news, weather, and climate explaining and other things. So behind the avatars are real journalists who go out, gather stories. Then the stories are presented by the AI avatars because it saves us time. And of course, it saves us the number of journalists in the newsroom. And then from there, we also use the AI to distribute the content. We started 3 years ago, and it was slow because people talk about the issue of trust. So initially, people didn't trust our AI avatars. But we took them along, we explained. Yesterday, it's interesting, it's happening at this point, because yesterday, I think I would say it's our breakthrough, because we did an AI-generated video on King Mzilikazi. Tomorrow, we'll be celebrating, I think, 140-something years of the death of King Mzilikazi. So we did a video on how King Mzilikazi moved from Zululand to the current Zimbabwe. All AI-generated voice, pictures, and everything. And within 3 days, it had been viewed by 377,000 people, a few minutes when I left to come here, and it had 500 comments. So this was the first time that we had such a huge number of people viewing an AI-generated content. So there is a lot of data there that we are saying in terms of the comments, in terms of the number of people that are viewing. So we are busy right now looking at this, and so what does this mean? Does this mean that people have finally accepted that we use AI in our work? Does it mean that there's certain content that people view in AI, especially historical, and we don't have pictures of King Mzilikazi or the warriors, and we create these characters using AI? But also, you then find that we get a lot of information, the leak that is there, the data in terms of the national budgets, the reports from Parliament, and we explain explain them using, in simpler terms, explainer videos using the avatars that we have. So it's a mixture of, but in the process we are also inputting data in terms of the information. But the struggle that we still have, of course, is the issue of languages, because we are, most of the languages that we're using are not still available in the large language models. So while we are trying to develop our own language models, we have to put up with the AI avatars that cannot pronounce Zenzele properly, or Bulawai, or you know, they say Blue, and Lupane will be Lupain, and all those kind of things. But we are getting there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. Let's turn to Dwazi, because I was asking you to tell us the output side with the avatars, which is absolutely fascinating, and the data you're getting from there. So on the input side, everybody here knows about data journalism. In your experience, what are the data sets that journalists would just love to get hold of to do data journalism?
In the beginning, you said, are we here to be real, or are we going to be a dreamer, or are we here to dream? I think I'm going to take the perspective of being a dreamer, based on our experience from our programs and what we've seen with the data. So the data is there. I do acknowledge that it is limited. There are limitations to accessing data, especially for journalists working in Africa. But what we've seen with our programs is that teams globally have been able to build tools to better access that data. And I think the real issue isn't necessarily where is the data, but rather what can we do with the data that already exists. So how can we make sense with it? And we had a particular team called Real Estate Alerter, which built a model which automatically flags unusual patterns in property data sets. So what it allows you to do is property data isn't necessarily the most interesting data, but what they were able to see is that there were actually interesting stories that came out of important property deals, real estate deals. So they were able to build that model to kind of turn mundane property records into investigation leads. So what we've seen is, despite there is a limitation, there is a possibility for journalists to be able to create stories using the data. I think one of the challenges that we've seen is, the challenge isn't necessarily data availability, is that there is an issue with upskilling journalists to be able to understand and better extract that data. So I do think that the responsibility lies with newsrooms to actually upskill their journalists in understanding that this is the type of data that exists and what they can actually do with it. And that's what we've seen from our programs, and we've seen what people are able to build using AI tools and better understand, to be better equipped dealing with data. So I'm going to take the perspective of being a dreamer. I do acknowledge there are those limitations, but data is in every interaction. Every decision creates a digital record or a trail. It exists, but you just need to learn how to actually create a compelling story using that existing data.
So you mentioned that interesting example of property. I'm just wondering if there's other sectors like public contract data that you've found is available, can be used?
I mean, if I'm speaking from the South African perspective, South Africa has quite a robust data infrastructure. I mean, we do have Statistics South Africa that releases extensive databases. We have National Treasury, which provides data on procurement data. So those are all the ways in which you can access it. There are existing government portals. It's true that the data is scattered, it's unstructured, and sometimes you do need extensive analysis to be able to understand it and extract it. That is true, and I think it does come back to actually upskilling journalists to understand that and knowing where to find it. So it may be limited, and in the teams, they did come across that. They came across the limitations in accessing data. So even with Real Estate Alerter, they did have access. They did have issues with accessing property data, but they were able to find other means of doing that, other ways of doing that. But that comes through skill and understanding what the data is and how to make sense of it.
Thank you so much. Let's turn to the person who pays the bills, who has to find the money to pay the bills. Nwabisa, who was formerly a leading editor in South Africa and chair of the South African National Editors Forum, and now is trying to help save the industry from the business side. Nobisa, tell us a bit about data use and AI use. It's not the same, of course, but sometimes they overlap. Where is data the most useful in terms of, for example, I don't know, finding money, managing money, advertisers, audiences?
So I think, thank you so much. So I think there are 2 points perhaps to start off with. So, I mean, what we all know is the importance of understanding, user data, what they're doing on your platform, how long they spend on your platform, etc., what they're consuming, when they come in, and that kind of stuff that, kind of helps us get a better understanding of who our user is. I mean, with to the extent that we can. I mean, there are limitations, and rightfully so. Should be some level of limitations as far as what we're able to understand. But there's that part, right? And I think then the second part is really what Zenzele speaks about. The data that is available and what we actually do with it. And I think from in our environment, what we've had to understand is helping all teams, so not just editorial teams, so helping all teams have a very granular understanding of what actually happens on our platforms, how people relate to us, how we service them in order for us to be able to build products that better service them, on the one hand, but also helping again, all teams, editorial, but across the board, commercial teams as well, to be able to understand what data exists that helps us make information, that gives us information to make decisions about, what kind of people should we serve and how. So I'll give you an example. I mean, you speak about Stats SA, and we did this experiment a couple of months ago, where we used an AI tool that really helped us mine data from Stats SA. And for me, it was amazing what we were able to get from there. Yes, on the one hand, editorially, but to be able to help our revenue teams make informed decisions about where to go. So we are all understanding that, particularly for organizations such as ourselves, clients and advertisers now are no longer necessarily looking for whether you are all things to all men, right? We always thought, if we kind of go in gung-ho, we've got the big numbers, we're going to make it work. And that's not necessarily how it is. Clients are very much picky about, help me speak to the people that I want to speak to at a particular time. And they may be niche, a group of people. And so what do we understand about them? And that exercise that we did, and that you really used, some AI tools, and we went through Stats SA, Treasury, etc., but helping us to actually understand how do we find those niche audiences. So for our teams who create content, to be able to do that and create the journalism, but also for our teams who are able to engage with clients to say, this is the solution that we can give to you based on the understanding of what, and what we have. And so I think probably my biggest job is to help, these sets of, of people really talk to each other internally in order for us to create the kind of solutions that really serve people journalistically as well as help us make money.
Okay, I think we've covered some very interesting things here, from outside, how you can find some data, how you can use data for projection, how you can use data for input, and then how you can use data in this servicing clients and audiences as well as the journalists. So I think we've got a nice kind of representation of that circle that I was doing. But I want to ask you some quick fire questions, and then we're going to turn over to the audience for their involvement. So my first question is that in your use of software, data analytics, for example, are you worried about data moving out of your sovereignty? So you use a tool, you apply to certain data, but this is a tool that's not just a tool that's talking to you and it's talking back to whoever supplied it. So tell us, let's start with Odanga. When you use these tools to work on data, is there a concern, or is it irrelevant that data is, when your use of tools and data is producing more data that's going back somewhere else?
Well, the long and short of what you're talking about is surveillance capitalism, yeah? basically farming data from your own users in order to use it to sell products back to them. And it depends. There's a big dependency on that, because I'll give you the example of the content moderation situation that is happening across the world, where a lot of the people that are actually carrying out content moderation in using certain systems are actually training themselves out of a job. Yeah. The more they use the platforms, the more they use the platforms for content moderation, the more the systems learn about the preferences that they're using, and the more AI takes over the job that they're actually carrying out. Now, there's a lot of questions that we have to ask ourselves of how these systems actually how we actually end up using these systems, and what kind of agreements we should have. A lot of people don't realize that to some extent, especially when a Google document is public, that when people actually write on those documents, that they're actually being scraped by AI to be used to train large language models, right? So there's a big rug that is being pulled under a lot of people, and the key question is whether they're okay with that.
Yes, I saw that WeTransfer 2 days
Oh yeah,
ago.
even Zoom.
Even Zoom.
Even Zoom.
But
Yeah.
WeTransfer had to, I don't know if they walked back or if they clarified that, in fact, they will use the data on WeTransfer for the service, but
Yeah.
they won't sell it to anybody
But you
else.
see, this is why regulation is important, yeah? Because aside from the anger and outrage and the hype that will happen the day we find out that the majority of the stuff that we're using is being used to train, or rather is taking our work and then using it to train AIs, right? What happens once the outrage is over? It's left for the policymakers and implementers to be able to follow up on those kind of things, the consumer protection agencies, right? Journalists who are able to do follow-up stories on that. Those are the guys that are supposed to follow up on that, because yes, it might be that WeTransfer simply just said, got advice from their PR guys and just told them, these guys will get tired after a day or two. Just ride it out and we'll be fine, and we can continue using your data, right? So I think it's also, some of these things are also about, in some cases, really thinking about things beyond the outrage that they could present to us. Yeah. And institutional work is very important here.
Just out of interest, I do hear that there's this company called Hugging Face, who have what they say 30 AI tools for newsrooms. They do not collect data. Back to the Hugging Face company.
Yeah,
so they're open source tools. So this is
my advice is, I know there are few people from DW, from Deutsche Welle in the room. Please talk to them about the current sandbox strategy that they have for implementing AI in the newsroom. Yeah, it's something that I know I've actually worked with some of them on, because they're being very careful about how they allow, in fact, in terms of the policies that they allow, how they allow journalists to use AI in the newsroom, right? Because they do not want to find that a lot of the work that they're doing ends up being handed over. I'm sure you heard of the case whereby Samsung engineers started uploading like proprietary IP into into LLMs, and then suddenly they found that if you carried out the right kinds of prompting, you could actually access proprietary information from the company through it. So there's a lot of very serious risks that could be faced. And, I think Deutsche Welle actually are carrying out what I think is a very good example of how to very slowly and carefully integrate AI into a newsroom. So they're creating like tailor-made sandboxes for journalists to use that do not store the data. Everything disappears once you've used it, and it's very carefully curated for the kind of outputs that they should release. Yeah.
So on this theme, if I just ask Zenzele quickly, and then I'll come to your avatars are not just puppets; they're generative AI, which gives you some deniability. If Zimbabwe security comes to hammer you because of what an avatar said, you say, "Well, it's the data." Is that true, or are they going to be surveilling you and tracking your data and trying to interfere with your data?
Well, we use the avatars also to say things that are uncomfortable and then hide behind the avatars. But For me, I think I'm not worried much about what happens with the data, whether it ends up with the software that we're using. We all use phones, and companies have been collecting our numbers, and Google have been suggesting restaurants to us. During COVID, we were going to banks and signing. What happens to the forms and the names that we sign in conferences? And we log into planes, and you then find discounts. We've been giving away data since time immemorial. And we now worried about AI. It's part and parcel of the society that we live in. I mean, we were signing in when we were coming to this conference. Who keeps that data? I saw it, there was no one manning it. So anyone can go take photographs of the emails and then start bombarding us with emails. So why are we policing other people when we don't police how we do our own data? So I know that once we put something there, someone is going to benefit. I mean, in AI, either you build, you borrow, or you rent, or you steal.
Or you rent.
So we are renting platforms where we are paying $10,000 a year for the license, and these guys are getting data from us, which I guess they will use for their. If the model that they're going to build is going to be better for me, I'm content with that for now.
Okay.
I'm poor I'm too poor to build the LLM, so why not use what is there?
Yeah.
Everyone else is taking data from me, including my church.
No, I was actually going to make, I mean, except for the church part, right? But I was actually going to make the same point, you know, as it does. So I think, so two things. I think one, I mean, the data is there. It's yes, there are limitations, but anyone can pretty much find out anything about anyone, by and large. You know, and I think while we ought to be careful, you know, in understanding what our, you know, what the usage of our data is, and what we do with it, but I think there is a level of understanding that we need to, you know, probably need to have that says, look, this thing is, you know, this is where it is. For me, what is more concerning, I think, particularly in, you know, I'll talk only on the South African context and in the media business, it is that I don't think we have a common understanding of not just the tools, but the systems that, you know, that do exist, what they take from us, what they do with it, and what level of control, if you will, that, you know, that we ought to have. I don't think that there is a level of uniformity of understanding how these things work. And so individual journalists, to your point, individual journalists probably in the newsroom, I think somebody put up a slide that says only 13% of you know, media businesses essentially have you know, AI policy. Ours was only developed a couple of months ago because, you know, we came into to the space and we said, actually, you know, everybody's using this. How do we ensure that there is a responsible level of, you know, of using it, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, people will be able to find out and scrapers will be able to do what, you know, what they do. But I think the thing that makes us vulnerable, in my view, is simply how fractured we are in terms of our understanding of the systems that effectively control the platforms that we are. And I think perhaps a lot of effort has to go into helping us, you know, have a much better understanding of what actually these platforms do, so that when we say this is what we're putting into, we understand exactly what we're giving away, we understand what the potential risks are, and we, you know, we kind of opt in or opt out into doing business in that way.
Just a very quick follow-up on that. So I'm sure in your company you've got lots of different data sets and so on, and so part of your challenge, I suppose, is to create a data pool with some, you know, ease of interoperability and use. Is that the case?
It is. So we did an AI across the business. So we did an AI sort of study, and sort of AI readiness study just before we implemented our policy. And what we found was actually fascinating. We found that the journalists were basically saying, scrap this thing, we don't want to use it, you know, check it away, don't even bring it close to us. And everybody else on the commercial side of the business, and all, you know, whether you're talking revenue guys, whether you're talking marketing guys, they were like, well, we're using it anyway, you know, nobody told us not to. And so, and what we found also interesting was the fact that the data told us things that we never really understood, you know, about a business. I'll give you an example. We've got certain publications that, you know, this is Joburg-based as far as we know, because print, it was a Joburg-based publication. And then when you actually look at the data, it actually tells you actually, or as much as the publication itself from a print perspective is Joburg-based, but a certain level or a niche audience resides, for example, in Cape Town. This is who they are, this is what they are liking, or a certain level of audiences reside elsewhere, this is what, and for us, that conversation then to say, perhaps the way we talk to our audience needs to change. How we say to our advertiser, here is who we know is a niche audience that does this. This is what they do. It helped us to be able to understand, our audiences much better. But it then takes an undoing of a lot of the systems that have already been put in place that we've worked with, for 100 years, to be able to say, actually, perhaps we weren't quite right about assuming, this set of information. Perhaps this is where our business actually lies.
Just to get in just to comment on what Nobisa just highlighted, I do think there are risks and concerns related to using AI. So as much as we can acknowledge that our data has been used countless for many, many years, just like Zenzele mentioned, we signed registration, we don't know what's going to happen with our signatures, but there are ways of mitigating those risks. But it's also important to realize that there is risk related to using AI. And so the ways in mitigating it, what Dr. Shiko highlighted is that there are over 80% of people that are using AI, but very little people have AI policies. That's one of the ways in which you mitigate the risks and concerns related to AI, knowing that these are the parameters that journalists can work within when using AI. And human oversight. AI is a tool, it can be a research tool, but it cannot replace journalistic judgment and verification. There constantly needs to be a human in the loop. So as much as there are risks and concerns related, which are incredibly important, as much as we use AI, and in our programs, we do encourage people to, not necessarily encourage, we support people in their use of AI, but we also highlight the responsible use of AI. So understanding what the risks and concerns will very much help with mitigating the risk. But also with AI, you do not need to use AI in your newsroom if there isn't a need. So AI isn't just a wonder tool you just add to your newsroom just because it's trending. You add it because there is a need to it. So you need to recognize whether there's a gap within your newsroom where AI can come in and assist it. If not, then don't. I mean, I was speaking to Sipho Kings from the continent, and they do not necessarily use AI in their news organization. And he said, well, there isn't a need. And I mean, I agree with that. You cannot just use AI in your newsroom if you don't have a need for it, because I do think it opens you up to more risks if you don't even understand how to use it.
So very quickly, in the work you've done with newsrooms, are any using generative AI for analysis as opposed to generating graphics or text, actually to analyze unstructured data?
Yes, so there was a team called Team Aura, so they built a tool to basically allow journalists to gain insights from unstructured data. So they train their models using different unstructured data, which it could be video, images, anything that cannot be neatly packaged in a spreadsheet. And they were able to help journalists find leads, but it's specific to science journalism. So it's journalists that are based at The Economist in London. So it helps them with their science journalists know that these are the leads that you can kind of create for your stories using science journalism.
I just want to chip in a bit, however, because there needs to be room for some skepticism around the hype train of artificial intelligence. There's this brilliant publication called 404 Media, which I think I really love reading. They do a lot of very good tech accountability journalism. This week they came out with a headline saying the media's pivot to AI is not real and is not going to work. Okay, and the basic subheadline is I had put it in my to-read list, and unfortunately I've had to pull it up now, but I will read it a bit later. But then one part of the argument they say is AI is not going to save media companies, and forcing journalists to use AI is not a business model. So I like what you've said. You know, this whole thing of thinking that, and especially for the Africans in the room, this whole thing of thinking that AI is aromat, that if you just put it on, if we just sprinkle it on our, sprinkle it on our news, or if on our process, that is magically going to make our work a lot better. This does not make sense. And by the truth is, a lot of the things that we're seeing, AI is not really making a lot of our analysis that much better. A lot of our market segmentation is really not that much better. We've always known that we're supposed to provide answers to the market, to advertisers. We've always known that we need to speak to niche audiences. So when I come and sprinkle a bit of aromat into that thing, to be honest, we are yet to really see the promise. In reality, at the commercial level, the commercial actual promise, it's in the 10x profits that we are supposed to be expecting to see, right? And I mean, even if you look at the recent MIT report that came out saying that 95% of, I think, Fortune 500 companies that have implemented AI are yet to see the commercial gains from it. Yeah, so, sometimes we really have to be very careful about whose hype cycle are we playing into, right?
Okay.
When we talk about the danger of AI, are we making Sam Altman feel like, yeah, I've created a Frankenstein, I cannot control it, and therefore we're allowing him to get away with a lot of the harms that his technologies are able to pervade?
Yeah.
So, for me, it is, let us be cautiously excited about this thing, yeah? I think that's something that we just continuously need to remind ourselves about, yeah.
Okay. I don't want speeches. Richard, looking. Very quick points, and then we do around. So there's one here. Any other quick points? Quick points. One here, thank you. And over there. Going.
Okay. Not
Okay,
just
go.
one thing on the court ruling, which was a very thoughtful, nuanced ruling. That was aggregate data, by the way, not personally identifiable data.
Yeah.
Let's be really clear about that. My main point is in all of these areas, like there's tremendous nuance. For instance, like at Google, I had lawyers always when we made algorithmic change. We were not allowed to even try to identify health interests, religious interests, or political interests, much less store or personalize against them to prevent from things like over-the-shoulder privacy breaches, right? So you have to be really careful. Content moderation, interesting point, but to do this at scale, AI is tremendously helpful. YouTube is hugely helpful. And I had a team back when we had a social network that failed, thank God. I had a team looking at posts. There are like 5,000 bizarre sexual practices around the world. And the psychological health of those people looking at that, not good. So, to the extent that we can use it to do better content moderation, frankly, we should. One other quick thing, harassment, identifying for harassment, how can that go wrong? Like, do we really want to create opportunities for governments and others to say, well, what are you identifying in terms of potential crimes? And are you getting that right? So again, we need to be really, really careful about how we approach these things. And I'll give you one last example. For years, I've been pushing to do something for news organizations where, we have Google Trends, which is great. I want to say, can we give geofenced trends to local news organizations? Because we found, remember the Flint water crisis in Michigan? If you looked 6 months before that ever became public, there were lots of questions like, why does my water smell bad, taste bad? Now, we couldn't really identify that as a problem, but we figured if we could give it to journalists, they would. But one of the concerns that causes us to delay it, they're now actually starting to test it, was if it becomes known that that's happening, guess what? People game it. And the smaller the geofence, the easier it is to game to create issues that aren't there. So I'm just saying, like on all of these things, when we talk about data sharing, all for it, but we've got to be really careful at identifying what we mean, who is sharing, for what reasons, and why, to make sure that we're not creating problems versus trying to solve them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To Zanzele, it's intriguing, the use of avatars, and increasingly we see on YouTube that there are a lot of amateur historians who are trying to use generative AI to tell these stories about Africa. But then there's the other aspect of it around the fact that the generative models will use giraffes to think about us, and there's a zoomification of what the stories are. Even as you tell the story of King Mzilikazi now, will you then be able to, does it capture the nuance? So for example, when it depicts who he was, the dress, the attire, because we're seeing that we're losing in using these models, those intricacies, especially for different communities. So thinking about how, in as much as it's imperfect now, how do we go back and make sure we embed the data that allows us to have accurate depictions? Because in an age of synthetic data, we might be contributing to the misrepresentation of our stories and our archives.
Okay.
A quick
Okay,
response
very
on that.
quick response.
I think what we have seen over the years, or over the last 2 years, generative AI has improved a lot when it comes to how they portray. A year ago, we could not draw a picture of a Ndebele warrior because they didn't have a spear. There's something that looked like a spear, and they could not differentiate between someone from Southern Africa and someone from East Africa. So when I said the warrior, it would to give me a Maasai. You know, and over the last year, it has improved. And when it comes to narration, we use the real voice. So there has been a lot of improvement, and we've been arguing a lot ourselves in the newsrooms about these narratives, which for me is quite interesting because that's where if we don't do anything, we will not improve anything. So I would rather start with an imperfect picture. If you were to go on, when we started doing AI, we had a character called Alice that looked like a human being, and she would nod now and then. Then we got feedback, and we did another Alice, which now men started to say, can I have your number? Can I take you for dinner? Because it was now so real that they thought that it was a human being. So we'll start from somewhere, and we'll build. And scholars will be criticizing, and will be improving. Yeah.
Over there.
Thanks, Guy. Just picking up on that stat from Dr. Shikar that we've quoted a few times. You know, I think it was 13% of journalists trust AI. I just want to put the reader's voice in the room as well. The general public doesn't trust generative AI either. It's one of the few technologies where some of the research out there suggests that the more people use it, the less they trust it. So I guess to your point, Adanga, you know, we're in danger of falling into a hole where we become obsessed with the potential of AI, but it could turn our readers off completely.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have to wrap up. I'm going to ask these colleagues one more question. Okay, we have 1, 2. So, okay, there I will. But
sorry.
quick.
We can't. We need to end the session
We need
now.
to end, okay.
So thank you, everyone. I
Well,
know.
I was going to ask them the magic question. What are the chances of collaborating to build large language models with rival media in Africa? We will leave that hanging. Thank you, Ompa. Right. Thank you, dear panelists.
Thank you so much, everyone. I know I'm standing in between your lunch, but because we were dragged in the session, I just need to clarify on the data security thing related to our forms and everything was. So let me be defensive. The data is secured very, very securely, and we will not necessarily be taking anything. There was someone who was guarding it to ensure that we are not taking a lot of your personal information. We never asked for your emails, your age, gender, and anything of that sort. So we just needed your signature for logistic purposes and reporting purposes. So thank you. Thank you. You've given us your consent, and by virtue of that, we can also leave and go to lunch. So we'll be coming back in 45 minutes. Hi, thank you.